Chapter 25-26. Whoosh! The emissary of the divine ruins disappeared in a flash and flew toward the fleet of the heaven-attacking tribe. Even though his strength had reached the LV-8 martial god realm, he could look down on the world. He was not afraid of any of the heaven-attacking tribe's top powers. However, he knew that he had no chance of winning against the hundreds of heaven-attacking tribe's battleships. It was impossible for him to fight the fleet head-on. It was not that he did not have the courage, but it would be meaningless. He would not be able to stall for time. Therefore, he remained invisible and caught up with the heaven-attacking tribe's fleet. After following the fleet for a long time, the emissary of the divine ruins attacked decisively after figuring out the situation. Sky overturning seal. He raised both of his hands and formed a profound divine art. Surging divine power erupted and formed a giant golden divine seal. Whoosh! The seal, formed by tens of thousands of inscriptions, instantly covered an area of 600 miles and enveloped the entire fleet. The seal absorbed the divine power of heaven and earth and unleashed a powerful force that blasted toward the hundreds of battleships. Instantly, a terrifying force that seemed to be able to turn the world on its head exploded in the sky. The fleet that was flying at high speed was instantly stopped. The hundreds of black battleships were sent flying. They rolled and collided with each other, creating loud bangs. The entire fleet was instantly thrown into chaos. Dozens of battleships fell from the sky and crashed into the mountains and the ground. Several towering mountain peaks were smashed to pieces, and dozens of deep pits were smashed into the ground, causing dust to splatter everywhere, covering the sky and the sun. Only the Southern Conquering Marshal's battleship remained balanced in the sky. The remaining hundreds of battleships were either lying on the ground in a disorderly manner or crashing around in random directions. Seeing this, the emissary of the divine ruins sneered. However, he did not show himself. He remained invisible and hid in the sky. His gaze was attracted to the leading battleship. He sized it up without blinking. The battleship was 2,000 feet long. It was pitch black and had a cold metallic luster. It gave off a powerful pressure. The battleship had a strange shape. Its sharp bow looked like a bird's beak. The ship had a streamlined body and two wide fan-shaped wings. The edges were densely packed with sawtooth and sharp blades. The tail of the battleship was also like a feather, spreading out like a fan, the edges of the arc flashing with a sharp, cold light. The emissary of the divine ruins frowned and muttered to himself. This warship is clearly the leader of the fleet. After being hit by this old man sky flipping seal, it only shook a dozen times but did not fall. It seemed like the grade of this battleship was even higher than the martial god grade, possibly reaching the true god grade. Could it be that the heaven-conquering fleet invading Shinwu continent has a true god powerhouse overseeing it? At the thought of this, his expression suddenly changed, and his eyes were filled with deep worry. If that's the case, then Shinwu continent is in danger. At the same time, the dozens of warships that had fallen on the mountains and the ground were rejuvenated and flew back to the sky, even though the attack just now had injured many soldiers of the heavenly expedition. However, the warship was very sturdy and was not destroyed. It was only slightly damaged and did not affect its flight or combat. Many of the warships quickly quieted down and arranged themselves in a formation in the sky, vigilantly guarding their surroundings. Many of the martial god captains released their formless consciousness and covered the surrounding 1,500 kilometers to search for traces of the enemy. Tens of thousands of soldiers of the heaven-conquering fleet were also ready to set off, their bodies bursting with intense battle intent. As long as they found the enemy that had secretly attacked them, they would bravely pounce over and tear them to pieces. In the Marshal's flagship, many black-armored soldiers were on high alert. The Southern Expedition Marshal and General Dragon subduing were in the middle of a discussion when they were interrupted by a violent tremor. Both of them realized that the fleet had been attacked by a powerhouse, and they immediately frowned as cold, killing intent flashed in their eyes. General Dragon, subduing, gripped his pitch-black greatsword and said with a gloomy expression, "Damn bastards! We haven't even gone to find them for revenge, but they've already attacked us? These reckless bastards are really seeking their own deaths." Although he said this, he was secretly delighted. The Grand Marshal had not allowed him to take revenge immediately, but he had wanted him to find the source of the boundless divine stone first, so he had no choice but to obey. Now that a martial god powerhouse had taken the initiative to come to him, the Grand Marshal would definitely not let him off. He would use this opportunity to crush the other party and eliminate the hatred in his heart. The Southern Expedition Marshal was very calm. He was neither flustered nor angry. He said indifferently, "Dragon subduing, go and see what's going on." General Dragon subduing bowed and said, "Grand Marshal, the fleet has been attacked by a martial god powerhouse, but the losses are not great. The other party is hiding in the dark and attacking. I will go and find them now." With that, he turned and left the hall, flying out of the battleship. He held his great sword and stood at the bow of the ship. His consciousness spread out like mercury and carefully searched the surrounding 1,000 kilometers. However, the surrounding 1,000 kilometers was silent, and there was nothing unusual. He frowned and released his consciousness again, expanding the search range to cover a radius of 1,500 kilometers. After 100 breaths, he searched the surrounding 3,000 kilometers but still found nothing. He did not believe it and expanded the search range to a radius of 9,000 kilometers. This was already his limit. His consciousness could only search such a large area. However, he still did not find any traces or aura of the enemy. Which bastard is it? How did he hide so well? Or maybe he ran away after attacking. General Dragon, subduing, frowned and cursed with hatred. It's most likely that bastard Ji Tianxing. He is the most sinister and despicable. He is used to using such methods. Then he transmitted his voice to the captains of the various battleships to ask if they had found any traces of the attacker. Over 100 captains replied one after another, but they all found nothing and did not find anything unusual. General Dragon, subduing's expression became increasingly ugly. He stood at the bow of the ship for a moment before returning to the battleship. Arriving in front of Marshal Jinan, he respectfully reporting to Marshal, this subordinate and all the captains have searched and found no trace of the attacker. The Southern Expedition Marshal raised his eyebrows and asked in a low voice, "Was it an attack by an expert or accidentally entered a formation, or was it because of other reasons?" General Dragon, subduing, replied with certainty, "I have searched carefully. There is no formation here, and it was not caused by some divine artifact. Someone attacked secretly. However, the other party fled far away after attacking." The Southern Expedition Marshal's expression was a little gloomy. After a moment of silence, he ordered, "Pass down the order. Continue forward." Thus, the fleet rearranged their formation and continued to fly toward the Heaven and God Nation. However, what everyone did not expect was that just as the fleet flew 1,000 kilometers, they were attacked by a mysterious expert again. The side of the fleet lit up with red flames that shot into the sky, and there was an earth-shattering explosion. Chapter 25-27. Boom! There was a deafening explosion as a dark red fireball with a diameter of more than 1,000 feet exploded on the side of the fleet. The dark, red, heavenly fire instantly engulfed more than a dozen battleships. The dozens of battleships around were sent flying by the force of the explosion. They rolled and crashed into the other battleships. After a series of explosions, the fleet was thrown into chaos again. The 14 battleships that were engulfed by the heavenly fire were burned red, and the temperature was high. They fell to the ground and smashed the 2 mountains into ruins. The soil was burned into dark red lava. The soldiers in the battleships only had the strength of a martial sage. They could barely resist the burning of the heavenly fire, and they were all seriously injured. What was more terrifying was that the raging heavenly fire contained the power of the spiritual soul. The soldiers were so dizzy that they almost fainted. In a short period of time, the more than 1,000 soldiers in the 14 battleships did not have much combat power. Only the 14 captains who were at the martial god realm could resist the burning of the heavenly fire and the impact of the spiritual soul. They were not hurt. After all, the battleships had neutralized most of the power. Even so, the 14 captains were still shocked and roared angrily. Swoosh! Swoosh! They escaped from the red battleships and flew into the sky with their swords and sabers. They looked around for the culprit. However, all directions were covered by a monstrous fire. They released their spiritual senses and could only see that the mountains and the ground were in a mess. There were more than 30 battleships in the sky, and they were rolling and falling to the ground. From those battleships, the angry roars of the warriors and captains could be heard. However, there was no trace of the attacker. The people cursed angrily. A few captains even took out their sacred weapons and used a special secret skill to search for the attacker. Marshal Nanjing's battleship and dozens of other battleships that were not attacked stopped in the sky. Many captains flew out and discussed angrily. They were trying to find the culprit. In an instant, the entire fleet was in chaos. Everyone was angry and irritable. No one could bear to be attacked twice in a row. This was an intolerable provocation and humiliation. However, the most infuriating thing was that the attacker was hiding in the dark and they could not find him. This time, the Southern Expedition Marshal was also furious. He furrowed his brows and looked at General Fu Long with a dark expression. His tone was cold as he said, "Fu Long, didn't you say that the attackers have already escaped?" This, General Dragon, subduing, was instantly embarrassed. He lowered his head in fear and trepidation, looking like he was admitting his guilt. "Please calm down, Grand Marshal. It's my fault for not being able to find the culprit behind the sneak attack." Marshal Nanjinan looked ahead with a sharp gaze and said in a playful tone, "You're already a LV9 Marshal God, but there's still someone hiding nearby and hiding from your divine sense. It seems that those Marshal Gods are not as weak as you said. This five elements world is indeed a little interesting, worthy of Ben Shuai personally making a trip." As he spoke, Marshal Jinan strode outside. General Dragon Fu hurriedly followed up and said, "Grand Marshal is right. Although the five elements world is small, there are many hidden talents, especially that Ji Tianxing. After all, he's the reincarnation of the Supreme Being from 1,000 years ago. Only you can kill him." Marshal Nanjinan curled his lips and sneered. "If he's the attacker, that's great. Ben Shuai would also like to see how the Supreme Being who rules over the 9 heavens looks like." As they spoke, the two of them walked out of the battleship and came to the deck. Marshal Nanjinan closed his eyes and released an invisible divine sense. It turned into billions of ripples and spread out in all directions. He was a true God realm expert and was fundamentally different from a martial god, empty god. Regardless of whether it was his physical body or spiritual soul, they had been tempered by the laws of heaven and earth and had reached the realm of eliminating the false and retaining the true. Even though he had only released his divine sense and did not use any divine skill to attack, General Dragon Fu stood beside him and also felt a great pressure. He could not help but shrink his neck and lower his head. As Marshal Nanjinan's divine sense spread out, a cold and murderous aura shrouded the area. In just 2 short breaths, Marshal Nanjinan's divine sense had seen through everything. Regardless of whether it was a secret skill, a disguise using divine power, or a folded alternate space, nothing could escape his detection. He suddenly opened his eyes and turned his head to look to the left. A cold light flashed across his purple eyes, and he sneered. So it's an old man. I don't think it's Ji Tianxing." General Dragon, subduing, followed his gaze and saw that the sky to the left was abnormally calm and empty. However, he believed that Marshal Nanjinan had seen through the other party's disguise. At the same time, the messenger of the divine ruins, who had used a divine skill to hide in an alternate space, suddenly shook. He had thought that the divine skill he had mastered was very magical and that no martial god would be able to discover him if he hid in an alternate space. Thus, he had been hiding in the wings of the battleship and looking for an opportunity to attack. It was only when Marshal Nanjinan appeared that he was alerted. When he saw General Dragon Fu following behind Marshal Nanjinan, he realized that Marshal Nanjinan's strength and status must be higher than General Dragon Fu's. As expected, Marshal Nanjinan released his divine sense and immediately locked onto his aura. Marshal Nanjinan's sharp gaze was like a real sharp blade. It pierced through thousands of feet and locked onto him, causing his hair to stand on end and a chill to run down his spine. *T. That guy saw through this old man's secret technique and locked onto this old man's soul. His aura is so strong. He's definitely not a martial god. He must be a true god. The messenger of the divine ruins was shocked. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, his nerves tensed up. After coming back to his senses, he did not hesitate to use a divine skill to escape through an alternate space. However, Marshal Nanjinan had expected him to escape and sneered. Hee, you've been discovered by Ben Shui, and you still want to escape? Old man, you're too naive. As he sneered, Marshal Jinan raised his right palm and punched the sky. Kaboom! A thunderous sound exploded from the ninth heaven. The calm sky was shattered into pieces, revealing a black hole with a radius of 100 miles. Crimson-red heavenly fire poured down like a flood. The pitch-black astral winds also formed dozens of tornadoes, whistling as they came. The messenger of the divine ruins who was shuttling through the alternate space and trying to escape was also sent flying. After all, the sky had been shattered and the alternate space had been cut off by Marshal Nanjinan. The messenger of the divine ruins flew out from the black hole and was enveloped by the heavenly fire as he fell towards the ground. Puffed. In midair, he spat out a mouthful of dark red blood. Without a doubt, he had been injured by Marshal Nanjinan. Even if he was an 8th stage martial god, in front of a true god like Marshal Nanjinan, he was extremely weak. The difference between the two realms was only one word, but the difference in strength was huge. End of this chapter. Chapter 25-28. In a 9 heavens, 10 absolutes pagoda. The 6th level's distorted space-time was as quiet as ever. Ji Tianxing had just ended his 40 years of closed-door cultivation. His strength had broken through to the 8th level martial god realm, and his combat power had increased by several times. After ending his cultivation, he got up and flew towards the depths of the distorted space-time. Not long later, he flew to Yun Yao's side and stopped. Yun Yao, who was dressed in a white dress, was sitting in the space-time, quietly circulating her energy to regulate her breathing. She did not go into closed-door cultivation. Instead, she seemed to be thinking about something and was very engrossed. Ji Tianxing looked at her bulging tummy, and his gaze became much gentler. He muttered to himself, "A long time ago, Yao Yao said that our children are about to be born. Now it seems that Chun Chun and Ya Yao will be born very soon." Thinking of this, he opened his mouth and woke Yun Yao up. Yun Yao ended her thoughts and opened her eyes to look at him. She said with a gentle expression, "Tianxing, you're here. Looks like your strength has broken through again." Ji Tianxing nodded and asked with concern, "I've just broken through to the 8th level martial god realm. What about you? Before I went into closed-door cultivation, you had already reached the 9th level martial god realm." Yun Yao gave a bitter smile and shook her head. "Although we have a huge amount of source stones, I've already reached the bottleneck. Even after 40 years of closed-door cultivation, I've only reached the peak of the 9th stage realm. I'm still unable to break through to the true god realm." Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and comforted her. "Don't be anxious. From the martial god realm to the true god realm, there's a gap between heaven and man. It's an extremely difficult gap to cross. Moreover, this is the interior of the God Pagoda, and it's isolated from the heavenly Tao. To break through to the true God realm, you must go through the tempering and test of the laws of heaven and earth. Perhaps if you cultivate outside the God Pagoda, your chances of breaking through to the true God realm will be higher." Yin Yao nodded to show that she understood. "All right. Wait until I've accumulated enough foundation and have the confidence to break through, then I'll go outside the God Pagoda to try." Ji Tianxing asked with anticipation, "Yao Yao, our children are about to be born, right?" Yin Yao lowered her head and caressed her bulging belly with both hands. She smiled gently and said, "Yes. The two little fellows have been in my womb for hundreds of years, and they are finally about to be born. Just now I was thinking about this, and I had a premonition that they would be born within a year at most." Ji Tianxing's eyes lit up, and he said with joy, "Born within a year? That's great. Yao Yao, you've worked hard all these years." Yin Yao smiled and said, "It's all worth it." Ji Tianxing pulled her hand and reminded her, "Since the children are about to be born, you should rest well first. After they are born, you could try to break through to the true God realm. I still have some matters to attend to, so you can rest here." Yin Yao nodded and waved goodbye to him. Ji Tianxing turned and left, leaving the God Pagoda very quickly. Shua, with a flash of golden light, he appeared at the peak of the barren mountain outside the Yin-Yang realm. It was evening, and the setting sun in the sky was as red as blood. Gray clouds rolled in the sky, and heaven and earth were filled with a heavy and oppressive aura. Ji Tianxing frowned and muttered subconsciously, "There's such an ominous phenomenon. Is something big going to happen?" After saying that, he was about to take out his communication jade slip and asked Bai Long to send more Dawnstones back. All these years, the Golden Mountain King had been working hard to build the divine battleship without slacking off. He had used up a lot of Dawnstones, and he did not have many left. However, just as he was about to take out his communication jade slip, a stream of light flew from the sky and landed in front of him. Swish! Ji Tianxing raised his head and saw that it was a communication jade slip. There was a special symbol carved on it. A message from the old man of the divine ruins? He raised his eyebrows with a trace of doubt. He reached out and grabbed the communication jade slip, and his divine sense entered it. The next moment, the old man of the divine ruins' deep and majestic voice sounded in his mind. "Ji Tianxing, the Heaven Punishers are back. A fleet of more than 100 battleships has appeared in the divine ruins. Come and help us." These two short sentences contained too much information. Ji Tianxing's expression changed immediately, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Damn it! The Heaven Punishers are back. The invading fleet is even bigger this time. There are more than 100 battleships. Ji Tianxing frowned, and his mood was heavy and oppressive. He did not hesitate to send a message and asked Bai Long to settle the matters of the human race in the Earth's core cave and immediately return to the divine ruins. Then, he returned to the Juqian 10 Absolute's pagoda and quickly gathered Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Bai Long, and Qian Yu. After everyone gathered, Ji Tianxing announced the invasion of the heaven-punishing fleet. Suddenly hearing this news, everyone's hearts tightened, and they felt a great sense of danger and pressure. Yin Yao said with a serious expression, 10 years ago, when General Fu Long escaped, Tianxing had already predicted that this day would come. That's why we've been trying to find origin stones all these years and desperately raising our strength to prepare for this day. Since the heaven-punishing fleet is here, what are we waiting for? It's time to show our strength. Ji Kun nodded in agreement and said with a serious expression, "Fortunately, the heaven-punishing fleet appeared in the divine ruins and not in the 3 divine kingdoms. Otherwise, the people would have been in a terrible situation. We must hurry over to help the emissary of the divine ruins and stop the Heaven Punisher's fleet. We must not let them leave the divine ruins." Ji Tianxing said in a dignified tone, "Everyone has been conserving their strength for so many years. It's finally time to use it. Take your origin stones and divine weapons. We'll set off now." Jiku took out his origin stone armor and long spear. After putting them on, he looked valiant and extraordinary. Bai Long and Qian Yu also put on their special origin stone armor to protect their vital points. Yun Yao also took out her armor and 2 swords and was about to put them on. Ji Tianxing quickly dissuaded her. "Yao Yao, our child is about to be born. Don't go. Stay here and wait for our news." Ji Ku, Bai Long, and Qian Yu also tried to persuade her to stay in the Divine Tower to recuperate. Yun Yao naturally disagreed. She shook her head and said, "At this critical moment, how can I let all of you fight a bloody battle while I hide in the Divine Tower? You don't have to persuade me anymore. I want to go through thick and thin with all of you. I believe that Chun Chun and Yaya will support my decision." Since Yun Yao was determined, no one tried to persuade her anymore. Ji Tianxing hesitated for a moment before he nodded and said, "All right, let's go together." Then, the group left Juqian 10 Absolute's tower and rushed to the central region of the Divine Ruins. The three of them and the two Divine Beast Strength had reached LV6 Martial God Realm, and they were protected by Origin Stones. Their speed was as fast as the Aurora, and they covered 1,000 miles in an instant. However, Ji Tianxing still felt a little regretful. He could not help but think, "It's a pity that my divine worship is not complete. If I had an Origin Stone divine worship, my speed would be doubled and my combat strength would be even stronger." Chapter 25-29. The Yin-Yang Mystic Realm was in the northernmost part of the Ruins of God. The ancient viewing platform was in the central part of the Ruins of God. The two places were hundreds of thousands of miles apart. Ji Tianxing and the others used the power of the Origin Stones to teleport. In just 10 hours, they arrived at the central part of the Ruins of God and were not far from the ancient viewing platform. While they were on their way, Ji Tianxing received 2 more communication jade slips from Martial God Taihao and Fairy Yuqing. The contents of the messages were basically the same. They were all related to the heaven-defying fleet. Martial God Taihao and Fairy Yuqing also knew about this and were rushing over at full speed. When Ji Tianxing and the others arrived near the ancient viewing platform, they found that the surroundings were calm. There were no traces of a battle within a radius of 20,000 miles. Seeing this scene, everyone was a little puzzled. However, no one doubted the words of the messenger of the Ruins of God. They believed that he would not lie. Ji Tianxing guessed that the messenger of the Ruins of God might be following the heaven-defying fleet and had already left the ancient viewing platform. Therefore, he sent a message to the messenger of the Ruins of God to ask about the location and the situation. After a full 100 breaths, the messenger of the Ruins of God replied. Ji Tianxing took the communication jade slip and used his divine sense to enter it. The messenger of the Ruins of God's low and hoarse voice sounded in his mind. "Ji Tianxing, wait for me near the ancient viewing platform. I am dealing with the heaven-defying fleet and leading them to the ancient viewing platform. Act according to the situation." The messenger of the Ruins of God's voice was a little weak, as if he had suffered a serious injury, but he was still holding on. Ji Tianxing frowned when he realized something was amiss. A hint of worry flashed across his eyes. He put away the communication jade slip and said to everyone, "The old man of the Ruins of God has stalled the heaven-defying fleet alone and is seriously injured. He will soon lead the heaven-defying fleet here. Let's meet him here." After saying that, he pointed to the ancient viewing platform and said, "Before the heaven-defying fleet arrives, let's set up an ambush on the ancient viewing platform and give them a surprise." Everyone understood what he meant and nodded in agreement. Then, everyone came to the ancient viewing platform and began to set up a divine array. Ji Tianxing wanted to set up a true god-killing formation on the ancient gazing platform to deal with the heaven-conquering fleet. With his and the others' strength, it would have been impossible to complete the task in a short period of time. It would have taken at least a month. However, he generously took out 300 dawn stones and placed them around the ancient viewing platform as the foundation of the divine array. In this way, the Origin Stones would provide a vast amount of true God-level energy. He and the others only needed to set up the formation. Swish! Swish! With Ji Tianxing as the leader, he stood on top of the ancient gazing platform and formed a seal with his hands, shooting out a golden and silver light that blotted out the sky. Thousands of gold and silver light ribbons rained down on the ancient viewing platform. Yin Yao, Ji Ku, Qian Yu, and the Black Dragon also cast their spells. According to Ji Tianxing's instructions, they constructed the veins of the divine formation. This was a complicated and tedious project that did not allow for the slightest mistake. Everyone was focused on setting up the divine formation with all their might. Their efficiency was extremely fast. In a short 15 minutes, the foundation of the divine array was completed. Half an hour later, the complicated veins were also completed. An hour later, the divine array was basically completed. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao cast another 100 spells and completed the divine array. Swish! A dazzling 5-color divine light burst out from the ancient gazing platform. It was even more dazzling than the sun, and it emitted a destructive energy wave. Soon, the divine light that blotted out the sky disappeared and retreated into the ancient gazing platform. After everything returned to normal, the divine array was completely set up and hidden in the ancient gazing platform. Ji Tianxing was pleased. He sneered and said, "Everyone, disperse and hide a rest. When the sky-conquering fleet arrives, this 9-change galaxy array will teach them an unforgettable lesson." Everyone quickly dispersed and retreated thousands of miles away, hiding around the ancient gazing platform. Everyone, including Ji Tianxing, used a secret art to hide their divine power and waited patiently. In a short 15 minutes, the sky in the east lit up with a bloody light. Then, a loud rumbling sound could be heard. Everyone turned to the east and saw a blurry black shadow flying towards them like an aurora. Behind the black shadow, there was a black cloud that covered the sky and was chasing after it relentlessly. Everyone looked carefully and saw that there were over 100 pitch-black warships in the black cloud. The leading battleship was extremely large, like a ferocious blackbird. The giant bird's sharp beak kept shooting out dark red light beams towards the black shadow that was escaping in front. Boom, boom, boom. The dark red pillar of light blasted into the sky, shattering it into countless black holes and cracks. Heavenly flames and gusts of wind poured out of the spatial rifts like torrential floods. That black shadow seemed particularly small, dodging left and right in the sky, fleeing in a sorry and dangerous manner. The fleet that was like a black cloud was like a ferocious primordial devil that was brimming with killing intent. It charged at Li Yao with terrifying pressure. Both sides were quickly approaching the ancient viewing platform. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and the others' hearts also gradually rose. They knew that the black shadow that was desperately escaping was the severely injured messenger of the ruins of God. They couldn't help but worry that if the messenger of the ruins of God didn't have enough power and couldn't dodge the dark red light beams, he would definitely end up in a miserable state. Fortunately, the messenger of the ruins of God didn't disappoint them. After a short while, the messenger of the ruins of God flew above the ancient viewing platform. He didn't stop at all and flew over the ancient viewing platform without hesitation. It was as if he didn't see the ancient viewing platform at all. Swoosh! After flying over the ancient viewing platform, the messenger of the ruins of God sped up and fled forward. The mighty sky-conquering fleet also arrived above the ancient viewing platform and flew over without stopping. After all, the Southern conquering marshal and General Dragon only had eyes for the messenger of the ruins of God. They didn't realize, nor did they think that there would be any mysteries behind that ancient stone platform. The Southern conquering marshal and General Dragon were standing on the deck at the bow of the ship and looking ahead with cold smiles. Seeing the messenger of the ruins of God's miserable appearance, the Southern conquering marshal laughed contemptuously. "Coward, run faster." His thunderous voice reverberated in the sky. The Southern conquering marshal was speaking the human language. Although his accent was a bit awkward, everyone understood. The messenger of the ruins of God turned his head and looked at him with a mocking smile. The Southern expedition marshal frowned and had a bad premonition. General Dragon's heart also skipped a beat, and he muttered, "This old thing has been beaten half to death by us and is running all over the place. How dare he still?" Before he could finish his words, the simple and unadorned stone platform below suddenly burst into a brilliant light that soared into the sky. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The moon-white stone platform released tens of thousands of 5-colored light blades and giant starry swords that instantly covered a radius of 100 miles. The hundreds of battleships in the entire fleet were instantly engulfed by the 5-colored light. Chapter 25:30. Boom, boom, boom. A deafening boom exploded in the sky, resounding through the nine heavens. Every battleship had been hit by at least a few hundred attacks. There were star swords that were 1,000 feet long, divine flame light pillars that were 100 feet thick, 5-colored light blades, and large axes. There were even a few thousand 5-color divine lightnings. The Galaxy 9 Changes array was one of the more powerful killing arrays among the true god arrays. When Ji Tianqing had set up the array, he had added many different types of divine powers to allow the holy array to explode with such terrifying power. In the blink of an eye, over 100 battleships had been thrown out and crashed into one another. Every battleship was riddled with holes and cracks. Their energy was leaking out crazily. There were also many soldiers of the Heaven Expedition in black armor that fell out of the gaps and cracks. Their fates were obvious. They had all been killed by the Galaxy 9 Changes array, and nothing was left of them. Even Marshal Nanjing's battleship had been thrown out, and it had smashed a few battleships before coming to a stop. The heavens and the earth were in chaos. The screams and roars of the soldiers of the heaven-conquering army resounded throughout the universe. This was only the first wave of attacks from the Galaxy 9 Changes array, and it had caused the heaven-conquering fleet to suffer heavy losses. Over 80 battleships had been severely damaged. The lighter ones were covered in wounds, and the more serious ones were twisted. Over 1,000 Marshal Sage Realm soldiers in black armor had been killed by the array, and their corpses had been destroyed. The sudden change caused the soldiers of the heaven-punishing army to panic. Marshal Nanjing and General Long Fu were enraged, and killing intent shot out from their bodies. That D*MNB* starred. He actually set up an ambush here and deliberately led us into a trap. Marshal Nanjing saw that the fleet had suffered heavy losses, and he was so angry that his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. He clenched his fists tightly. Previously, he had thought that victory was within his grasp, and he had acted like a cat playing with a mouse. He had not even been in a hurry to kill the messenger of the holy ruins. He had only wanted the messenger to walk towards his death in despair. Now, he had paid the price for underestimating the messenger of the holy ruins. This was a slap to his face. The dragon's subduing general's gaze pierced through the divine light and stared at the messenger of the divine ruins 200 miles away. He cursed in a sinister tone. "Sinister and despicable old thing, I will definitely tear you into pieces." After saying that, he said to the Southern Expedition Marshal beside him, "Grand Marshal, the messenger of the ruins of God has been running for his life, so he definitely won't have the chance to set up an ambush here. Besides, the formation on the ancient gazing platform had obviously surpassed the martial God realm and had reached the true God realm. Therefore, I suspect that he has a helper." Marshal Jinan looked at him coldly and asked, "Didn't you tell Ben Shuai that that old thing is the strongest person on Shenwu continent? Apart from him, who else can set up a true God-level grand array?" This, General Dragon subduing was speechless and didn't know how to explain. At the same time, the ancient viewing platform lit up with dazzling 5-colored light as the second round of attacks erupted. Tens of thousands of saber lights and sword shadows, as well as lightning and fire pillars, bombarded the 30 or so battleships. At the sight of this scene, General Dragon Subduing's eyes narrowed as he revealed an expression of realization. "Grand Marshal, I understand now. There are no true gods on this continent, so they can set up a true God-level grand array by relying on the Boundless Godstone. I have already sensed the aura of the Boundless Godstone on the ancient gazing platform." "I see." Marshal Jinan nodded slightly and said coldly, "It seems that they have already discovered the effects and power of the Boundless Godstone, and they have also found the source of the stone." General Dragon Subduing sneered. "This way, we can save ourselves the trouble. We only need to capture them and interrogate them." Marshal Jinan nodded and waved his hand to order. "Pass down the order, get everyone to stay away from the ancient gazing platform. Ben Shuai wants to see what other methods they have besides that true God-level grand array." In fact, after the heaven-conquering fleet had been ambushed by the divine array once, they had all fled in all directions. Only 30 or so battleships had been attacked twice by the divine array, and their fates were very miserable. Those battleships had been distorted and cut into pieces, turning into piles of scrap metal that fell to the ground. More than 2,000 black armored soldiers had been killed, and more than 1,000 soldiers had been lucky enough to survive, but they were also seriously injured. Only the 30 or so captains of the martial god realm had only suffered minor injuries and could still continue to fight. Following Marshal Jinan's order, the 60 or so battleships retreated to a distance of 200 miles. The 30 or so captains also retreated, flying to the sides of the marshal's flagship and standing still. The 1,000 or so soldiers of the heaven-conquering fleet who were seriously injured had met with a disaster. In the process of their retreat, the Milky Way 9 Changes Grand Array launched its third attack. Following a series of loud bangs, the 1,000 or so soldiers were swallowed by the five-colored light and blasted into pieces of flesh and blood, dying on the spot. After the five-colored light dissipated, the world regained its calm, but the pungent smell of blood still lingered in the air. The heaven-conquering fleet stopped in the sky 200 miles away, in a vigilant and alert posture. Marshal Jinan, General Dragon subduing, and more than 30 captains stood on the deck of the flagship, staring at the messenger of the divine ruins in the distance. The messenger of the divine ruins stopped running and stood in the sky above the ancient viewing platform, facing off against the heaven-conquering fleet. "Ha! Bastards of the heaven-conquering fleet, how does it feel to be ambushed?" The messenger of the divine ruins laughed coldly, his tone full of contempt and provocation. General Dragon subduing and more than 30 captains were enraged, their eyes surging with murderous intent. "Marshal, please allow us to fight. We will definitely capture that old thing alive and let you do whatever you want with him." General Dragon, subduing, bowed and asked for permission to fight in a serious tone. Marshal Jinan raised his hand and looked sharply at the messenger of the divine ruins. He shouted loudly, "Human worms of the five elements world only have this much ability. These are just some despicable tricks, yet you are so proud of them. Old thing, listen carefully." Bun Shui was the Marshal Jinan, who led millions of soldiers under the heaven-conquering emperor. He was the current master of the Purple Cloud Star Zone. Even a most powerful purple cloud star had become Bun Shui's property. A mere five elements world would soon be under Bun Shui's feet. Let me give you one last piece of advice. Admit your guilt and surrender obediently, and Bun Shui might spare your lowly life. Although his human language was a bit lame, his voice was filled with murderous intent. His aura was majestic and domineering. His voice reverberated in the sky, containing supreme divine power, causing everyone's divine souls to tremble. The messenger of the divine ruins' expression changed slightly, and a trace of seriousness flashed across his eyes. Only now did he know that the galaxy outside the five elements world had undergone such a drastic change. However, he was not afraid and said proudly, "What heaven-conquering fleet? What master of the Star Zone? You are just a group of uncivilized beasts. I am just a tombkeeper. You can't even do anything to me. What right do you have to invade the five elements world?" End of chapter. Chapter 25:31. The Southern Expedition Marshal was not in a hurry to attack, and the messenger of the divine ruins was happy to stall for time. Taking this opportunity, he quietly took a healing pill and circulated his energy to recuperate his injuries. The Southern Expedition Marshal saw through his actions and thoughts, but he did not take it to heart. After all, he was most concerned about the person who set up the true God-level array. "Old thing, Bun Shui disdains to bicker with a frog at the bottom of a well like you. The person who set up the array on the ancient viewing platform must be your accomplice. Get them out, and Bun Shui can finish them off together." The Southern Expedition Marshal looked coldly at the messenger of the divine ruins and shouted arrogantly. The messenger of the divine ruins pretended to be puzzled and sneered. "Accomplice? I'm the only one here. How can I have an accomplice? Bastard of the heaven-punishing clan. Are you scared? If you are, get out of the five elements world as soon as possible to avoid being buried here." The messenger of the divine ruins knew that the array on the ancient viewing platform was set up by Ji Tianxing. Since Ji Tianxing hid and did not show up, he naturally had his own plans, and the messenger of the divine ruins would not admit it. The Southern Expedition Marshal naturally did not believe him and sneered contemptuously, "Old thing, don't pretend to be confused with Ben Shuai. You are just an 8th-stage void god. Even if you have the boundless godstone, you can't set up a true god-level array. If Ben Shuai guessed correctly, this should be Ji Tianxing's method. I heard that he is the reincarnation of the divine king from 1,000 years ago, and only he can master a true god-level array. Get him out and die together." The messenger of the divine ruins was stunned and asked in puzzlement, "Boundless godstone? What is that? Ugly beast! Have you lost your mind or something? Or are you delusional?" This time, the messenger of the divine ruins was not pretending. He had never heard of the boundless godstone. The Southern Expedition Marshal was completely enraged and said murderously, "Old thing, Ben Shuai's patience has run out. Your dog life ends here." When he finished speaking, he raised his fists and punched the messenger of the divine ruins above the ancient viewing platform. Boom! Boom! 2 dark red fists the size of mountains instantly traversed 200 kilometers in the sky and arrived in front of the emissary of the divine ruins. The emissary of the divine ruins was shocked. His figure flashed and teleported hundreds of kilometers away, barely dodging the fist attack. However, while the emissary of the divine ruins dodged, the ancient viewing platform was hit by the 2 fists. Boom! Amidst the deafening explosion, the ancient gazing platform shook violently, and rubble flew everywhere. The dark red fist radiance collapsed on the spot, turning into millions of fragments that scattered in all directions. After suffering such a heavy blow, the ancient viewing platform was on the verge of shattering. The surface of the platform was covered with cracks like a spider web. The foundation of the Milky Way 9 Transformations Grand Array that was set up on the stage was also damaged, and its power became extremely chaotic. Swish! Swish! The ancient viewing platform, which was full of cracks, flashed with 5-color divine light and quickly leaked out a vast amount of divine power. Seeing this, the emissary of the divine ruins felt his heart ache and thought regretfully, "Damn it! The grand array that Tianxing laid down was actually destroyed by him. I originally planned to use this grand array to deal with the heaven-defying fleet, but it seems like there's no hope now." The previous battle and pursuit had already shown him the terrifying strength of the Southern Expedition Marshal. Now, the Southern Expedition Marshal had almost destroyed the ancient gazing platform with just one move. His expression became more and more serious, and a layer of haze covered his heart. A thought flashed through his mind uncontrollably. How can a few martial gods resist the ferocious army of the heaven-conquering fleet? Who can stop the Southern Expedition Marshal, who is at the true god stage? At the same time, the Southern Expedition Marshal waved his palms again and sent out 2 dark red light blades that were thousands of feet long. His target was not the emissary of the divine ruins, but the ancient gazing platform in the sky. Obviously, he wanted to destroy the divine array on the ancient gazing platform first before killing the emissary of the divine ruins. The emissary of the divine ruins was anxious. He growled and was about to block it. However, at this moment, a bright golden light lit up the northern sky, and a cold and majestic voice was heard. "A mere true god dares to be so presumptuous here?" When the cold shout was heard, the 2 dazzling golden swords had already arrived first, piercing the dark red light blade. Kaboom! An earth-shattering sound exploded, shaking heaven and earth. The golden swords and the dark red light blades collapsed at the same time, exploding into thousands of pieces and scattering in the sky. The Southern Expedition Marshal's killer move had actually been neutralized. Such a scene caused everyone to turn pale with fright, and they revealed an expression of disbelief. The emissary of the divine ruins was shocked. He looked to the north with burning eyes and muttered, "In just a few years, his strength has actually reached such a level? This is unbelievable." Even though he knew that this person was the reincarnation of the Divine King, he still could not believe this result. The Southern Expedition Marshal looked to the north and stared at the white figure that was flashing over. His lips curled into a sinister smile. The reincarnation of the Divine King? Indeed, he is quite capable. The dragon-subduing general also looked at the newcomer with resentment and revealed a cruel and sinister smile. Ji Tianxing. After 10 years, I can finally take revenge. After the Grand Marshal captures you, I will definitely cut off your head with my own hands. In the blink of an eye, the white figure teleported from 3,000 miles away to the sky above the ancient viewing platform. Swoosh! When his figure turned from an illusion to a real one, his true appearance was revealed. He was tall and in high spirits. His white robe fluttered in the wind, and his aura was unparalleled. There was no doubt that the newcomer was Ji Tianxing. His left hand was behind his back, and his right hand was holding the pitch-black sword of burial of heaven. He pointed at the ground, and his aura was sacred and overbearing. Even though he only looked coldly at the Southern Expedition Marshal, the dragon-subduing general, and the others, his invisible divine power enveloped 1,000 miles. The Southern Expedition Marshal and many Heaven Punishers felt an overwhelming divine power pressing down on them. Instantly, their hearts tightened, and a trace of fear appeared in their divine souls. That was a suppression that came from the bloodline and divine soul level. Ji Tianxing had the blood of a divine king and the soul of a divine king. He naturally had an innate, noble, and majestic aura. He glanced at the Southern Expedition Marshal and then at the dragon-subduing general. He sneered disdainfully. Dragon-subduing, you have disappointed me. You have forgotten the lesson from back then and dare to make a comeback. This time, no one can save you. You are dead meat. The dragon-subduing general was shocked by Ji Tianxing's aura. He forgot to refute and could not help but take a step back. When he came back to his senses, he was instantly enraged. He shouted arrogantly, Ji Tianxing, you are the one who doesn't know that you are about to die. This time, I have invited the Southern Expedition Marshal to come with me. I have brought over 100 captains and nearly 10,000 elite soldiers. Not only will you die without a burial place, but the entire Five Elements world will also prostrate under the Marshal's feet. Ji Tianxing sneered mockingly. He sized up the Southern Expedition Marshal and shook his head. Dragon-subduing, no wonder you dare to come back to die. It turns out that you have found a backer. It's a pity that your backer is too weak. Chapter 25:32. Too weak. These three words enraged the Southern conquering Marshal and the top powers of the sky-slaying tribe. This was an unforgivable humiliation. However, Ji Tianxing had said it so casually as though he was stating the truth. How could the top powers of the sky-slaying tribe not be enraged? In the eyes of General Long Fu and the other captains, the Southern conquering Marshal, who was a true god, was an invincible god. He was a real immortal god. Everyone treated the Southern conquering Marshal like a god. How could they tolerate Ji Tianxing's humiliation? However, before the Southern conquering Marshal gave the order, General Long Fu and the other captains did not dare to attack. The Southern conquering Marshal stared at Ji Tianxing and laughed in anger. Ha ha ha! You are indeed the reincarnation of a supreme being. Although you have not regained your former strength, your arrogance and confidence have not diminished. The Southern conquering Marshal shook his head and sighed regretfully. It is a pity that you're only a LV-8 martial god. It is ridiculous for you to say such arrogant words. Although Ji Tianxing's strength and body constitution were special and no one could see through his cultivation level, the Southern conquering Marshal was a true god. However, the Southern Expedition Marshal was a true divinity, a realm higher than Ji Tianxing. No matter how well Ji Tianxing hid, he could not hide from the Southern conquering Marshal. Following Marshal Jinnan's words, more than 30 captains burst into laughter and began to discuss with contempt. Ha ha ha! I thought he was powerful. I did not expect him to be so arrogant when he is only a LV-8 martial god. Ha ha! That guy must still be living in a dream. He thinks he is the king of gods. This five elements realm is too weak. The southern conquering marshal can destroy it with a flip of his palm. Many captains mocked Ji Tianxing without restraint, their faces filled with pride. Only General Long Fu remained silent. His expression was ugly and his eyes were filled with shock. He stared at Ji Tianxing and muttered in disbelief. LV-8 martial god? How is this possible? He had just broken through to the martial god realm 10 years ago. It had only been 10 years, and he had already reached the 8th-stage realm. I don't believe it. How can there be such a strange thing in the world? When the Southern Expedition Marshal heard the dragon subduing General's voice, his expression froze. What did you say? The South Conquering Marshal turned his head and stared at the dragon subduing General with his eyes wide open. General Dragon Fu slowly lifted his head and said with a bitter expression, Grand Marshal, when I escaped from the Five Elements world, Ji Tianxing had just broken through to the martial god realm. The Southern Expedition Marshal was dumbfounded. His face was full of shock, and he didn't know what to say. The mocking laughter of the captains stopped abruptly. Everyone was speechless. They were all dumbfounded as they stood on the spot with their mouths agape. After a long time, someone gasped and exclaimed. In fact, many people were unable to accept this fact and started to question General Dragon subduing. Fu Long, you must be mistaken. Who in the world can improve from the first level martial god realm to the 8th level in 10 years? That's right. We have conquered the Purple Cloud Star Zone and been to dozens of worlds, but we have never heard of such a thing. This is definitely not true. How can there be such a demonic genius in the world? Even if he is the reincarnation of a supreme being, it is impossible for him to improve by 7 levels in 10 years. That is the martial god realm. Everyone knew that the advancement of a martial god realm expert was very slow. Even a top genius would need 100 to 200 years to improve by 1 level. No one dared to question the Southern Expedition Marshal, so they could only question General Dragon Fu. General Dragon Fu remained silent. He was speechless. The Southern Expedition Marshal's expression was dark, and his eyes were solemn. At the same time, Ji Tianxing's loud laughter came from the sky. Ha ha! Weren't you all arrogant and domineering just now? Why are you all so cowardly now? If they admitted defeat, they would obediently lay down their weapons and surrender. Perhaps I will be merciful and give you a dignified death. Ji Tianxing returned the Southern Conquering Marshal's words back to him even more harshly. The messenger of the Divine Ruins was in a good mood and could not help but laugh. At the same time, he secretly asked Ji Tianxing, Tianxing, other than you, who else is here? Ji Tianxing replied, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and my 2 divine beasts. They will not show up for the time being and are hiding in the dark. I have other plans. The messenger of the Divine Ruins calmed down and said, That's good. However, our strength is still not enough. We have to continue stalling for time. When Tai Hao and Fairy Yuqing arrive, we will be qualified to deal with them. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, They have more people, and the Southern Expedition Marshal is a true God Realm expert. He will not be scared by me. Even if all of our people are here, we cannot fight them head-on. We can only try our best to deal with them. Fortunately, the Divine Ruins is vast. As long as we restrain the fleet and prevent them from leaving the Divine Ruins, we will be halfway to success. Ji Tianxing appeared to be extremely confident and domineering. However, he was doing this to buy time. Only he knew that they had no chance of winning against the heaven-defying fleet. Once they were defeated, the Five Elements world would be finished. After a while, the experts of the heaven-defying clan came back to their senses and woke up from their shock. The Southern Expedition Marshal looked at Ji Tianxing sharply and said in a deep voice, Ji Tianxing, Ben Shuai has to admit that your aptitude is extremely high. Ben Shuai has never seen anyone like you in his life. A monstrous genius like you has never been seen before in all of history. If you insist on resisting, it would be a pity for you to die here. Ben Shuai will give you one chance. If you are willing to surrender, Ben Shuai will protect you and recommend you to the Great Emperor. With your talent, you will definitely be valued by the Great Emperor, just like Ben Shuai. You have to know that our great emperor can reach the divine court and has the ambition and ability to rule the 3,000 worlds. As he spoke, the Southern Expedition Marshal pointed at the sky and said in a serious tone, "You know very well that this is a world sealed by the gods. Even if you are the reincarnation of the deity king, you will not be able to leave this world, let alone return to the divine realm. As long as you surrender, Ben Shui will take you away and ensure that you can ascend smoothly." Marshal Nanjanan's words were extremely attractive to the martial gods of the five-element realm. However, he was facing Ji Tianxing. The result was obvious. "Ha ha, what a joke." Ji Tianxing laughed contemptuously at the sky. "Since you know that I am the reincarnation of the deity king, how dare you say such ignorant and ridiculous things? How can a mere great emperor of the heaven-defying clan be worthy of my surrender? He is not even worthy of being my servant. Even the divine court you speak of is just a joke in my eyes. As for leaving this sealed world, that is even more ridiculous. If I don't have a way to ascend, how did I ascend to the divine realm 1,000 years ago and become the king of gods?" Chapter 25:33. The South-conquering marshal was rendered speechless. He looked extremely embarrassed. The dragon-subduing general and the other captains were so angry that they almost exploded on the spot. The great Emperor of Heaven Punisher was the supreme leader of the Heaven Punisher tribe. Every member of the Heaven Punisher tribe viewed the great Emperor of Heaven Punisher as their religion. They would not allow anyone to blaspheme him. Ji Tianxing's words had crossed their bottom line. They could not tolerate it anymore. "Grand Marshal, the dragon-subduing marshal requests for battle. Captain Xing Yi requests for battle. Captain Lu Ming requests for battle. Captain Changfeng requests for battle. Only by tearing the lowly martial god of the human race into pieces can the hatred in our hearts be appeased." The dragon-subduing general and more than 30 captains all shouted and requested for battle. Even if they were to be smashed into pieces and their blood stained the sky, they would tear Ji Tianxing into pieces. The South-conquering marshal would not stop them. He shouted with a murderous aura, "All soldiers, listen up. Kill Ji Tianxing and that old bastard at all costs." As the sound of his voice faded, the dragon-subduing general and over 30 captains all drew their weapons, roaring as they pounced toward Ji Tianxing. The other 60 or so warships also revealed rows of cannons, releasing dark red light beams that blotted out the sky and covered the earth. Boom, boom, boom. Kill, charge. Deafening explosions and earth-shattering cries exploded in the sky and shook the universe. In an instant, the ancient viewing platform was drowned by the dark red light beams. Boom, boom, boom. A deafening sound burst out, and the red light and the broken stones burst out. The area within a radius of 100 miles was completely messed up. The ancient viewing platform had already been destroyed by the South-conquering marshal. Now that it was being attacked by more than 10 warships, it collapsed on the spot. Along with the cracking sounds, the ancient viewing platform with a radius of 10 miles shattered into several hundred large rocks and fell from the sky. The Star River 9 Changes array on the platform collapsed just like that. 300 pitch-black origin stones were also scattered in the sky, covered in debris. By the time the thousands of dark red light pillars came crashing down, the emissary of the divine ruins had already teleported 100 kilometers away. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, donned his pitch-black origin stone armor, blocking the attacks of the dark red beams of light as he collected the origin stones that were falling from the sky. Even though he had a lot of origin stones, losing 300 wouldn't make much of a difference. However, he did not want those origin stones to fall into the hands of the Heaven Punishers. Pung pung pung. Dark red pillars of light hit him one after another, producing a series of muffled booms. In a short span of 2 breaths, he was struck more than 800 times. Even though the defense of the Origin Stone armor was strong enough to neutralize the attack of the dark red pillar of light and protect him from harm, the Origin Stone armor was still able to protect him. However, he was still sent flying dozens of miles away, tumbling over 100 times in the air. When the red light dissipated, he had only collected 100 or so origin stones. There was still half of the origin stones falling from the sky to the ground. He wanted to use a grappling technique to grab those origin stones back. It was a pity that the dragon subduing general and over 30 captains had already killed their way over. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. They slashed out giant red blades that covered the sky and unleashed all kinds of divine techniques that poured down like floodwaters. Ji Tianxing was fearless as he roared furiously and charged forward to meet him. Relying on the strong defense of the origin stone armor, he swung the burial of Heaven's sword and unleashed hundreds of sword radiances. Sun Crush. The dazzling golden sword radiance shattered the giant red blades in the sky and hit over a dozen captains. With muffled booms, the armor of the captains was slashed open by the sword radiance. Dark red blood spurted out from their bodies. With a series of painful groans, the captains were sent flying. However, the other 20 captains' attacks all hit Ji Tianxing. Bang! Bang! Ji Tianxing was also sent flying by the violent force. He tumbled over 100 miles away. Fortunately, the captains were unable to break the defense of the origin stone armor. Not even a dent was left on the surface of the armor. Ji Tianxing was safe and sound. He was about to regain his composure and charge toward the captains again. At this moment, the dozens of battleships not far away shot out more than 3,000 dark red light beams, swallowing him up. Boom! 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 At this critical moment, Ji Tianxing had no time to dodge. He could only inject his divine power into the armor and block with all his might. The result was without a doubt that he had blocked the bombardment of the light pillars and was not injured. However, he was blasted down from the sky by the terrifying force of the impact and smashed into the ruins below. He had just jumped out of the ruins and was about to fly into the sky. The 30 captains joined forces and performed their divine techniques again. They released endless red light and drowned him. Boom! 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 Ji Tianxing was blasted into the ruins again and smashed into the ground. The ruins that were 100 miles wide had more than doubled in size. Within 1,000 miles, more than a dozen mountains had collapsed. Countless ravines had also appeared on the ground. Ji Tianxing was completely helpless. He was weak, but he had to withstand the siege of more than 30 martial gods and more than 30 battleships. No matter how strong he was and how powerful he would not be able to fight back. If not for the protection of the Dawnstone armor, he would have been seriously injured. After all, ants could bite an elephant to death. Even a true god could not withstand the siege of so many people. Damn it, I can't be delayed by them. I have to lead them to Ku. This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind. He simply burrowed into the ground and fled toward the north. While escaping, he used his divine sense to observe the situation on the battlefield. He saw that the messenger of the divine ruins was also being bombarded by more than 30 battleships and was fleeing in a sorry state. He did not know Ji Tianxing's specific plan, nor did he know where the ambush was, so he could only circle around the ancient viewing platform. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing hurriedly reminded him, "Senior, flee to the north." The messenger of the divine ruins immediately had a target and fled toward the north. On the Marshal's flagship not far away, Marshal Nan stood at the bow of the ship and sneered when he saw Ji Tianxing and the messenger of the divine ruins fleeing together. Ha! Reincarnation of the divine king? Tombkeeper? They are all useless. Our race's fleet is invincible. We have used our divine cannons to conquer countless worlds and dominate various star zones. Two mere insects of the human race want to stop Shuai's attack. Today, this marshal will blast you all to smithereens. After sneering, Marshal Nan waved his hand and gave the order to pursue. More than 60 battleships flew toward the north and chased after the messenger of the divine ruins. At the same time, dozens of battleships continued to fire at the messenger of the divine ruins in the sky. General Long Fu and more than 30 captains held weapons and chased after Ji Tianxing, who was traveling underground. The Heaven Punisher's morale was high. They had regained their confidence and were exceptionally domineering. In a short while, the The two sides had chased for more than 10,000 miles. The fleet and more than 30 captains were finally lured into the ambush by Ji Tianxing. End of chapter. Chapter 25:34. This area wasn't big. It was only 100 miles wide. On the surface, it looked like a bare mountain range with a few valleys. But before Ji Tianxing showed up, Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and the others had set up all kinds of divine arrays. After he left, Yin Yao, Ji Ku, and the others didn't stop while he was talking nonsense with South Conqueror Marshal. In the seemingly peaceful, barren mountains and deep valleys, terrifying formations had long been buried. South Conquering Marshal was cautious. He had been ambushed a few times before and had learned his lesson. Even though Ji Tianxing and the emissary of the divine ruins were running away, he was still cautious. Would there be any traps ahead? So he also spread out his immortal will to check the situation in the sky and on the ground. When the heaven-defying fleet flew over the mountains and passed by a deep valley, the heaven-defying fleet suddenly stopped. South Conquering Marshal suddenly sensed that there was a powerful divine power hidden in the valley and the surrounding mountains. He immediately frowned and realized the danger. He waved his hand and ordered the fleet to stop. However, General Dragon and more than 30 captains and more than 20 battleships had already rushed into the valley. They were too excited. They just wanted to kill Ji Tianxing as soon as possible and tear apart the guy who insulted Emperor Tian Punisher. When they heard South Conquering Marshal's order, it was too late to retreat. Boom, boom, boom. The next moment, hundreds of fire pillars of different colors appeared in the barren valley. There were golden sacred flames, red Nanmingli fire, black annihilation fire, and purple soul-eating fire. More than 300 fire pillars as thick as water tanks shot up from the valley and attacked the captains and more than 20 battleships. At the same time, starry sword auras, icy blue ice spears, and black North Sea water dragons also appeared in the mountains around the valley. All kinds of divine spells appeared and drowned the captains and battleships. Only 40 battleships stopped in time after hearing South Conquering Marshal's order. These warships stopped outside the valley and quickly retreated. The dozens of captains and thousands of soldiers on the battleship saw their companions being ambushed with their own eyes. They all showed grief and indignation and let out angry roars. Rumble! A loud sound reverberated in the sky. The colorful brilliance of the divine spell enveloped an area of 100 miles and illuminated the night sky. A devastating shockwave swept out in all directions like a violent gale. The mountains around the deep valley were flattened. Gravel and dust flew everywhere. The earth was trembling crazily, and 100-li-long ravines split open, collapsing continuously. As for General Dragon subduing and the others, as well as the 20-odd battleships, their fates were naturally miserable. The armors of more than 30 captains were shattered. Their bodies were covered with wounds and blood was spurting out. There were 12 people who were the most unlucky. They were already injured, and now they were directly blasted into pieces. The 20 or so captains who were lucky enough to survive were all missing arms and legs. Their bodies were covered in hideous wounds that exposed their bones. A series of screams and cries of pain echoed in the sky. The heavily injured captains fled into the distance in panic. They would not be able to fight for a short period of time. As for the 20-plus warships, they were also distorted and filled with cracks and craters. Another 1,000 or so black-armored soldiers were killed, and more than a dozen captains were lightly injured. After regaining their senses, many of the battleships quickly retreated and fled to the vicinity of the Marshal's flagship. The battleships were in a mess. The soldiers were all circulating their energy to heal their injuries or save their heavily injured companions. Such heavy losses caused South Conquering Marshal's heart to bleed. He was so angry that he almost went berserk. Sinister, despicable human worms. When Bun Shui takes the unbounded divine stone, he will definitely destroy this dirty world. South Conquering Marshal was seething with anger as he roared with murderous intent. A few hours ago, he had led the heaven-conquering fleet and ambitiously charged into Shenwu continent. He wanted to take the unbounded divine stone and enslave this world. However, he had not expected that in just a few hours he would encounter setbacks and attacks. 40 of the 100 battleships had been destroyed. Of the remaining 60 battleships, half were covered in scars. Of the 10,000 elite martial sages, more than 3,000 had been slaughtered, leaving only 6,000 or so. Of the 100 martial god captains, 12 had been killed, and 23 had been heavily injured. This was a truly unfavorable start to the war. Only then did South conquering Marshal completely believe Dragon, subduing General's words. This seemingly ordinary five elements realm was truly filled with crouching tigers and hidden dragons. It was impossible to guard against. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. After the divine light that covered the sky dissipated, all of the battleships retreated behind the Marshal's flagship and remained vigilant of their surroundings. More than 20 heavily injured captains also entered the Marshal's flagship to circulate their energy to heal their injuries. Dragon's subduing general's face was covered in blood as he returned to South conquering Marshal's side in a sorry state. This time, Dragon's subduing general did not hesitate and said in a solemn tone, "Marshal, I believe that you have seen the methods of Ji Tianxing and the emissary of the divine ruins. They are sinister and despicable, and they have all sorts of schemes and tricks. We have just entered Shinwu continent and have already suffered such heavy losses. You must take action and kill Ji Tianxing and the emissary of the divine ruins for our plan to proceed smoothly." Although Dragon's subduing general's words were somewhat accusatory, South conquering Marshal did not get angry. He completely put away his contempt and treated Ji Tianxing and the others with caution. Whoosh! He stepped into the sky and looked down at the ruins from above. He then raised his fists and smashed them down fiercely. Boom! Boom! Two dark red fists the size of mountains slammed into the ruins of the ground. Following an earth-shattering explosion, a huge crater appeared in the ground, and endless amounts of dust burst out. The array formations hidden underground were destroyed on the spot. The incomparably powerful impact flattened everything within a radius of 500 miles. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, and the others who were hiding underground, as well as the emissary of the divine ruins in the sky, were all sent flying. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The four martial gods, Hei Long and Qin, were all forced to fly into the sky and reveal their true forms. Everyone gathered in the sky and stood in a row, facing the heaven-conquering fleet with a common hatred. Ji Tianxing took out a set of origin stone armor from his spatial ring and handed it to the emissary of the divine ruins. "Senior, I have a set of armor here. Put it on." The armor may not be of excellent quality, but it is made of special materials and has powerful defenses. The emissary of the divine ruins took the armor and looked at it. A look of astonishment flashed through his eyes as he asked, "Isn't this armor made of the black stone that you gave me? Could it be that the black divine stone is the boundless god stone that South conquering Marshal was talking about?" "Boundless god stone?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and smiled. "That's what the heaven-conquering race calls it. We call it an origin stone. It's because of this divine stone that we have the qualifications to intercept the heaven-conquering fleet." Chapter 25:35. The messenger of the divine ruins did not refuse. He knew that this was a special moment, so he did not refuse. He quickly put on the energy stone armor. At the same time, the South conquering Marshal looked at everyone with fire in his eyes and roared coldly, "Worms of the human race, you have completely infuriated Ben Shuai. Don't beg for mercy. Only by killing all of you will we be able to answer to our soldiers." The South conquering Marshal raised his fists and shot out dozens of dark red fire pillars. They were like giant dragons that shot toward Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and the others. 16 fire dragons flew across the sky. Their dazzling flames lit up the area. A terrifying suppressive force sealed the area. No one could dodge. They could only use their arts to block it. The colorful divine light collided with the dark red fire dragons, creating an earth-shattering explosion. Bam! 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 The explosion spread across a few thousand miles. Dazzling fragments of divine light burst out and covered the sky. The violent impact sent everyone flying. The black dragon and Qianyu also fell from the sky and landed on the ground, creating two giant pits. Fortunately, everyone had the energy stone armor to protect them, which neutralized most of the impact. Even though their faces were covered in dust and they looked miserable, they were not seriously injured. However, just as they were about to counterattack, the attacks came one after another. Boom, boom, boom. 60 battleships fired at the same time. Thousands of dark red light pillars drowned the crowd. Following a series of loud explosions, the ground within a radius of several hundred miles was blasted into ruins that were filled with ravines and craters. Everyone was sent flying again. They rolled and fell into the ruins. They looked even more miserable. Ji Ku, the messenger of the divine ruins, Qin Yu, and the black dragon were all injured. Only Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao were unharmed. Before they could recover, the south-conquering marshal waved his hands again. More than 20 dark red light blades slashed toward them like giant axes. The 60 battleships also accumulated a vast amount of energy. They were about to shoot out red light beams in the next moment. When she saw this, Yin Yao shouted with a grave expression, "We can't let this continue. We can't fight the Heaven Punisher head-on." As she spoke, she flew into the sky without any regard for her own safety, wielding her two swords to meet the Southern Marshal. The power of heaven and earth, the glory of the sun and the moon, yin and yang and the 5 elements coexist, and the cycle of heaven and earth is endless. Great Qiankuan's sword. She murmured expressionlessly. She waved the source stone divine sword with both hands and unleashed the most ferocious divine power. She used her ultimate divine technique. Swoosh! Swish! Instantly, the 2 source stone divine swords lit up and turned into 5-colored giant swords that were 10 miles long. They slashed towards the south, conquering Marshal with unparalleled power. Boom! With a deafening sound, the Southern Expedition Marshal's dark red axe was shattered into pieces by the 5-colored giant sword. The power of the 5-colored giant sword didn't decrease as it slashed at the Southern Expedition Marshal. The violent and unparalleled power sent Marshal Nanjinan flying. He rolled and smashed into the Marshal's flagship behind him. He rolled a dozen times on the deck of the warship before he managed to get rid of the impact and came to a stop. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing, the messenger of the divine ruins, and the others were excited. They looked forward to the battle. No one had expected Yin Yao to be able to unleash the power of the true god realm when she was only a LV 9 martial god. However, the next scene caused everyone's hot-bloodedness to die down. Marshal Nanjinan stood up. He stretched his neck and stretched his limbs before he flew back into the sky. He looked safe and sound. There wasn't a single wound on his body. It was as though Yin Yao's attack was just an itch for him. He looked down at everyone with disdain and sneered, "Ha ha ha! A bunch of empty god realm ants. How dare you think you can hurt Ben Shuai? You've overestimated yourselves." As soon as he finished speaking, he formed a seal with both hands. Red light shot out from his body as he used his ultimate divine technique. Refined Starbreak. As he roared, the endless red light that covered the sky condensed into hundreds of dark red sabers that were thousands of feet long. They shot toward everyone like a rain of arrows. Bang! 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 The red light shrouded everything within a few hundred miles. It was chaotic and blurry. No one could see their figures clearly. A series of muffled sounds exploded, reverberating endlessly in the sky, deafening everyone's ears. Yun Yao, Ji Tianxing, Ji Ku, and the messenger of the divine ruins were sent flying again. Qin Yu and Hei Long were also sent flying. Their injuries were even more serious. There were a few hideous wounds on their bodies, and blood was flowing out. Marshal Nanjinan and the 60 warships were chasing after them and were about to attack again. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing decisively led everyone to retreat. "Don't fight recklessly. Let's retreat first and try to deal with them later." The messenger of the divine ruins also agreed with his decision and said, "Let's retreat to the ancient viewing platform first. I have a way to deal with them." Hearing this, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku's eyes lit up. A glimmer of hope surged in their hearts. The old man of the divine ruins has a way to deal with the heaven destroyers? Does he have any other trump cards? He has guarded the divine ruins for thousands of years. His identity is very mysterious. He must have a trump card. As long as the messenger of the divine ruins can stall the heaven destroyers, we could defeat them one by one. With that thought in mind, everyone sped up and flew toward the ancient viewing platform. Swish, swish, swish. Everyone and the two divine beasts ran for their lives. Their figures flickered in the sky at an extremely fast speed. Seeing this, Marshal Nanjinan shouted with murderous intent, "Lowly insects, don't even think about escaping from Ben Shui." As he said that, he waved his hand and ordered the fleet to chase after them. Many captains and heaven destroyers were still worried that there would be more ambushes and traps ahead. But Marshal Nanjinan took the lead and charged at the front. He had learned his lesson from before. While chasing, he released his divine sense to explore an area with a radius of 20,000 miles. No formation or ambush could escape the detection of his divine sense. This time, he would definitely not be ambushed again. He would not make the same mistake a third time. Soon, 15 minutes passed. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and the others avoided Marshal Nanjinan's attacks and the fleet's bombardment. They finally escaped to the ancient viewing platform. Although the ancient viewing platform had been destroyed and the surrounding mountains had been leveled, only 1,000 miles of ruins were left. But everyone believed in the messenger of the divine ruins and hoped that he would use his trump card. "Senior, how are you going to deal with Marshal Nanjinan and the Heaven Destroyer's fleet?" Everyone flew over the ruins. Ji Tianxing looked at the messenger of the divine ruins and asked. The messenger of the divine ruins hesitated and did not answer. Right at this moment, an icy blue stream of light flew over from the front. Swish! In the blink of an eye, the stream of light arrived. Everyone looked over and saw that within the icy blue brilliance was a white-haired woman in a white dress. It was Fairy Yuqing who had rushed over to help. In the chapter this book came from. Chapter 2536. Seeing Fairy Yuqing appear, everyone was stunned for a moment, and the same thought appeared in their minds. Could the trump card, the messenger of the divine ruins, be Fairy Yuqing? But on second thought, this should be impossible. Fairy Yuqing's strength was the same as the messenger of the divine ruins, or even a little weaker. How could she be considered trump card? Swoosh! In the next moment, Fairy Yuqing flew closer and met up with everyone. "Sorry I'm late." She nodded to everyone and greeted them. Then she asked, "How's the situation?" The situation was urgent, so the messenger of the divine ruins did not say much. He only replied, "There are too many of them. We can only avoid them for now and try to deal with them." Fairy Yuqing looked up into the distance and saw a vast black shadow streaking across the sky at lightning speed, chasing after them. Seeing this scene, she could not help but frown with a solemn expression. "There are so many battleships." Ji Tianxing added, "The leader is the Southern Expedition Marshal of the Heaven Punisher race. He has the strength of a true immortal." A true immortal? Fairy Yuqing's pupils constricted, and she could not help but gasp. Before anyone could answer, the Southern Expedition Marshal had already chased after them with his fleet. Boom! 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 Dozens of battleships fired at the same time, blasting out thousands of dark red light pillars that poured down on everyone. Everyone's expression changed, and they hurriedly scattered in all directions, casting spells to dodge. Bang! 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 A series of muffled sounds exploded, and everyone was sent flying again. Including Fairy Yuqing, everyone was hit by at least a dozen cannons. Their hair was disheveled, and their faces were covered in dust. Everyone's injuries were more serious, and their strength was greatly depleted. Their combat strength began to decline. Before everyone could circulate their energy to suppress their injuries, the Southern Expedition Marshal charged over again. Human worms, no matter how many of you there are, you're still a motley crew. Die! As he roared, the Southern Expedition Marshal turned into a dark red phantom and rushed into the crowd, attacking with his fists and feet. Everyone could only use their ultimate techniques and divine skills to resist with all their might. Boom! Smack! Bang! Bang! Muffled collisions and the sound of divine power collapsing rang out one after another. Everyone fought with the Southern Expedition Marshal. They were constantly sent flying, but they rushed back without any regard for their own safety. Even though Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, the messenger of the divine ruins, and Fairy Yu Qing were all quite powerful. The four of them besieged the Southern Expedition Marshal and were barely able to fight to a draw. However, Marshal Jinan had 60 warships and dozens of captains to help. They had sealed off an area of 800 miles, forming a huge encirclement. Dark red pillars of light and divine art killer moves rained down like a storm, drowning Ji Tianxing and the others. Everyone was attacked from the front and back, unable to hold on any longer. The two sides had only exchanged blows for 100 breaths of time, but their injuries had already worsened. They could only retreat as they fought. Just as the two sides were engaged in a fierce battle, a dazzling golden light came from afar. Within the golden light was a middle-aged man wearing armor and holding a heavy sword. It was Marshal God Tai Hao. As soon as he arrived near the battlefield, he saw dozens of huge warships and dozens of experts of the heaven-punishing race surrounding Ji Tianxing and the others. The tragic situation of the battle caused his heart to burn with worry, and his chest erupted with flames of rage that soared to the sky. He didn't charge into the encirclement. Instead, he charged toward a warship with endless killing intent. Go to hell, you bastard of the heaven-punishing race! Marshal God Tai Hao roared. He held the heavy sword with both hands and slashed down from the sky. Boom! Crack! The giant golden blade that was 1,000 feet long hit the warship with a thunderous sound, although the battleship was smashed from the sky and smashed into the ground. However, the warship was unscathed after the giant golden blade exploded. Only a shallow dent was left on the warship. After all, Marshal God Tai Hao's heavy sword was only a mid-grade Void God Divine Sword, which was the same grade as the warship. This sudden scene caused the other warships to turn pale with fright. The 9 warships nearby all turned around and aimed their cannons at Marshal God Tai Hao. Boom! 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 The 9 warships fired their cannons at the same time. Thousands of dark red light beams covered Marshal God Tai Hao. Boom! 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 Although Marshal God Tai Hao tried his best to dodge, he could only dodge part of the light beams. He was still hit by hundreds of light beams. He was sent flying backward on the spot, tumbling hundreds of miles away. While he was still in midair, his body was already twisted and deformed. Blood spurted out from his mouth and nose, scattering across the sky. Before he landed, the warship that had crashed to the ground flew back into the sky. The 10 warships locked onto him and shot out thousands of dark red light beams again. Seeing the dark red light beams coming toward him, Marshal God Tai Hao sensed the great danger of death. His expression changed drastically and his pupils contracted. At the moment of life and death, he could only unleash all his divine power and form a golden light shield around him. He held the divine sword in front of him with both hands. Boom! 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 Another series of loud noises erupted, resounding throughout the universe. Marshal God Tai Hao's divine light shield shattered. The divine sword in his hand was broken in half. Blood and pieces of flesh splattered all over his body. When he fell from the sky and landed in the ruins, he was severely injured. His body was a bloody mess. His entire left arm was shattered. His legs were broken at the knees. His calves were missing. He crawled in the ruins and used his only arm to support himself. He slowly straightened his body and lifted his bloodied face. Bastards of the heaven punishers. Even if we are crushed to pieces, we humans will never yield. Marshal God Tai Hao's eyes were as red as fire. He roared at the top of his lungs. Even though he was not strong enough and his body was damaged, he did not back off. The next moment, more than a dozen warships locked onto him and shot out dark red and purple light beams at the same time. More than 1,600 light beams had been compressed by the divine formation. Their power was twice as strong as before. Boom, boom, boom. The dark red light beams poured down from the sky like raindrops and drowned Martial God Taihao. Before he died, he transmitted his voice to Ji Tianxing, the emissary of the ruins of God, and the others. I'll leave the world of 5 elements to you. I'll try my best. When the voice echoed in everyone's minds, they realized Martial God Taihao was on the verge of death. The crowd turned around and saw a pillar of light devouring Martial God Taihao. Boom! An earth-shattering bang that resounded throughout the universe exploded between heaven and earth, and it was so loud that even the deaf could hear it. The ground within a few thousand miles shook violently. A bottomless pit was left behind. Endless dust and golden blood splattered into the sky. Martial God Taihao had died on the spot. His body and divine soul were shattered and returned to the heavens and earth. Seeing this, everyone was filled with grief and anger. Their eyes almost popped out of their sockets. However, the others were surrounded and on the verge of death. Their situation was not any better than his. Even if they wanted to save him, they were powerless. Chapter 25:37. Martial God Taihao had returned to heaven and earth. His physical body and divine soul had been destroyed, leaving only some scattered pieces of armor and broken sword in the ruins. If he had the protection of the Dawnstone armor, he might have been able to hold on for a while longer and not die so quickly. Unfortunately, he did not manage to break into the encirclement or come into contact with Ji Tianxing and the others. After he died, the dozen or so battleships turned around and aimed at Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and the others, firing again. Dark red light pillars covered the sky and poured down like a rain of arrows. The mountains and rivers within a radius of 800 miles were blown up countless times, raising a lot of dust and sand. Ji Tianxing, the messenger of the divine ruins, and the others not only had to resist the bombardment of dozens of battleships, but they also had to fight with the Southern Expedition Marshal, General Fu Long, and the others. Under such circumstances, it was extremely dangerous, and they could lose their lives at any time. Everyone's injuries became more and more serious. In just a few minutes, they could no longer hold on and could only retreat in a sorry state. Everyone was seriously injured, covered in blood, and their hair was disheveled. Fortunately, they had the protection of the Dawnstone armor to hold on until now. Otherwise, they would have been blasted into pieces like Martial God Taihao. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Everyone supported their seriously injured bodies and retreated into the depths of the mountains. The Southern Expedition Marshal was full of fighting spirit. He looked up to the sky and laughed wildly. Ha! A bunch of chickens and dogs. Do you finally understand that the situation is irreversible? In the face of absolute power, all of your despicable tricks have no use at all. Now, you can say your last words. As he roared, the Southern Expedition Marshal led the fleet and followed closely behind Ji Tianxing and the others. The two sides chased for 6,000 miles and came to a majestic and vast mountain range. This mountain range was particularly majestic. There were no trees or plant around, and even the soil was dead gray. It was silent and desolate. The retreating messenger of the divine ruins suddenly stopped and no longer ran. He looked at Ji Tianxing seriously and said in a low voice, "Don't run anymore. It's meaningless." Fairy Yuqing frowned and asked anxiously, "Old man, what do you mean? Are you going to give up?" Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and actually nodded in agreement with the messenger of the ruins of God. He said with a solemn expression, "We are too passive. Even if we continue to run, we will only exhaust ourselves and be killed one by the Southern Expedition Marshal. If they split up, it would be difficult for them to escape. Furthermore, the heaven-destroying fleet would leave the ruins of God and slaughter the entire Shenwu continent. No one could stop them. At this juncture, we must think of a way to deal with the heaven-defying fleet. At the very least, we must injure the Southern Expedition Marshal." Hearing his words, everyone fell silent. The emissary of the divine ruins looked behind him coldly, staring at the Southern Expedition Marshal and the heaven-destroying fleet. "Now that things have come to this, I can only use my final trump card to end this calamity." Hearing this, everyone's hearts lit up with hope, and they all looked at him expectantly. However, Fairy Yuqing could hear the solemn and resolute tone of the messenger of the ruins of God. Her heart immediately tightened, and she hurriedly asked, "Old man, what are you trying to do?" The emissary of the ruins of God did not answer. He looked at everyone with a solemn expression and solemnly instructed, "All of you, stay here and defend. No matter what, you have to buy me 100 breaths of time. After 100 breaths, if you are still alive, we will have one." This time, it was not only Fairy Yuqing who felt that something was wrong. Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and the others also had a bad premonition. Everyone surrounded the emissary of the ruins of God and asked worriedly, "Senior, what are you trying to do?" "Old man, what do you mean?" The emissary of the ruins of God did not answer. He turned around and flew towards the mountain range not far away, leaving everyone with a desolate and lonely back view. Everyone looked at his back with mixed feelings. Fairy Yuqing could not help but follow him and question in a sad voice. However, the emissary of the ruins of God resolutely moved forward and landed on the peak of the highest mountain. He took out an ancient, dark black stone tablet from his bosom and closed his eyes to begin casting a spell. The stone tablet was only the size of a palm, and there were traces of fractures on the edges. The surface was rough, and there were a few ancient patterns, but they had long been blurred. Anyone could tell that this stone tablet was definitely an ancient item, and it emitted an endless vicissitude aura. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. As the emissary of the ruins of God waved his hands, the ancient stone tablet began to spin above his head. Thousands of strands of golden light surged out from the top of the emissary of the ruins of God's head and surged into the ancient stone tablet, causing the stone tablet to light up with golden light and reveal strange and mysterious golden patterns. Seeing him like this, Fairy Yuqing vaguely guessed something. Her heart trembled and her eyes were covered with a layer of mist. "No, old man, stop it." However, the emissary of the ruins of God turned a deaf ear and continued to use his secret technique. In the sky not far away, the Southern Expedition Marshal had already arrived. He waved his hand and shot out more than a dozen giant blades that could split heaven and earth, charging towards Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and the others. Further away, 60 battleships were coming over in a grandiose manner. They were dispersing their formation and forming an encirclement. Fairy Yuqing could not delay any longer. She could only turn around with tears in her eyes and face the Southern Expedition Marshal and the heaven-defying fleet. An even more tragic battle immediately began. Bang, bang, bang. The dark red giant axes that could split heaven and earth blasted Ji, Tianxing, and the others away, causing them to spit out blood. Ji Tianxing flew 30 miles away before he could dissipate the terrifying impact. He opened his mouth and spat out a mouthful of golden blood. His figure flashed, and he rushed to a battleship on the side. Swoosh! His body emitted golden light, and in the blink of an eye, he turned into a 30-meter-tall giant. This was the ultimate skill of the celestial dragon tyrant body. It increased his combat strength by 5 times, and he instantly reached the peak of the martial god realm. He stood above the battleship, holding the sword of burial of heaven with both hands. He roared and slashed down fiercely. Open! The sword of burial of heaven also erupted with golden light that shot into the sky. It formed a giant sword that was thousands of feet long and erupted with destructive power. The pitch-black battleship could not dodge in time and was hit by the giant divine sword on the spot. Kaboom! With a thunderous explosion, the battleship was cut in half by the sword of burial of heaven on the spot. The wreckage of the battleship that was cut in half fell from the sky and smashed into the ruined ground. More than 20 of the hundreds of heaven-defying soldiers in black armor were killed by the giant's sword on the spot. The remaining 70 or so people fled from the wreckage of the battleship in a panic and flew into the sky to form a battle formation. They wanted to join forces to deal with Ji Tianxing. However, Ji Tianxing, who was in a frenzy, had already unleashed his maximum strength and slashed with his sword again. Burial of Heaven. As he roared, a pitch-black sword light that was 10 miles long slashed into the crowd. Immediately, flesh and blood splattered everywhere. More than 50 black-armored soldiers were killed in an instant. They died without a complete corpse. The remaining 20 or so people were lucky enough to survive, but they did not escape far before they were killed by Ji Tianxing's sword light. End of chapter. Chapter 25:38. After dealing with one battleship, Ji Tianxing rushed to the other battleship with the Burial of Heaven sword. However, before he could attack, Marshal Nan teleported over and intercepted him. Bang! Bang! Two mountain-sized, dark red fist shadows blasted Ji Tianxing back. While he was still in the air, Marshal Nan attacked again. He threw out two giant blades that were thousands of feet long and slashed at Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing tried his best to dodge one of the giant blades, but he still couldn't escape the fate of being hit by the other giant blade. Boom! With a muffled sound, he fell from the sky and smashed into the ground. A deep pit was formed on the ground, and dust and gravel splashed out. Ji Tianxing lay in the ruins, blood flowing out of his mouth and nose. The origin stone armor he was wearing was not broken, but his internal organs were damaged and displaced. His injuries were even more serious. Fortunately, Fairy Yuqing and Yun Yao joined forces to attack Marshal Nan and hold him back. Ji Tianxing finally had a chance to catch his breath. He quickly flew out of the deep pit and blocked the attacks of the battleships. He took the time to attack Marshal Nan. The two sides fought fiercely in the sky. The sky collapsed and the earth cracked. The night was as bright as day. Ji Tianxing, Fairy Yuqing, and the others desperately blocked Marshal Nan and the fleet, not allowing the messenger of the divine ruins to be disturbed. As a result, all the attacks were blocked by Ji Tianxing and the others. Indeed, no one could disturb the messenger of the divine ruins. However, Ji Tianxing, Fairy Yuqing, and the others were beaten miserably. Their injuries continued to worsen, and their lives were in danger at any time. The messenger of the divine ruins stood on the mountain peak and focused on using the secret technique, forgetting everything outside his body. Golden divine flames ignited all over his body, and countless golden patterns extended under his feet and drilled into the mountain range. The palm-sized stone tablet spun rapidly above his head, blooming with golden light that covered the world. It was as dazzling as the sun. Swoosh! Swoosh! Thousands of golden patterns spread through the earth and mountains, drilling deep into the ground, causing some magical changes. About 30 breaths later, raging roars could be heard from hundreds of miles deep underground. Then, the earth and mountains began to shake. As time passed, the shaking became more and more intense. The peak of the mountain continued to collapse, and countless cracks appeared on the ground. 60 breaths later, the mountains and the earth within a radius of several hundred miles began to tremble violently, as if a super earthquake had taken place. Rocks and soil from the collapsed mountain peaks rolled down, and the cracks in the ground grew wider and wider. Boundless gray mist surged out from nowhere and filled the heavens and the earth, and it emanated a boundless aura of age and sorrow. From the depths of the ground came a sound that sounded like weeping and complaining. It sounded like the wind, but also like the wailing of an ancient remnant soul. Such a strange scene caused Ji Tianxing and the rest to worry in their hearts. They couldn't help but guess what the envoy of the ruins of God was doing. The south-conquering marshal and the experts of the Heaven Punisher race also slowed down their attacks. They could not help but search around for the source of the abnormal situation. Just as everyone was filled with shock and confusion, the mountains and rivers within a radius of 500 miles began to collapse even more rapidly. Endless smoke and dust rose high into the sky, covering hundreds of miles of land. The south-conquering marshal sensed that something was wrong and quickly released his divine will to search around. Soon, his divine will locked onto the envoy of the ruins of God on the peak of a mountain 300 miles away. After seeing the envoy of the ruins of God's actions and the stone tablet that was as bright as the sun, he finally found the source of the problem. Damn it, what is the envoy of the ruins of God doing? The other insects of a human race are trying to stop Ben Shuai and the fleet's attacks. They seem to be protecting that old bastard. No, Ben Shuai has to stop him. The South-conquering marshal frowned as a cold light flashed in his eyes. His figure flashed and appeared in front of Ji Tianqing. He unleashed all of his power and punched at Ji Tianqing with both fists. The two of them were too close, and Ji Tianqing had no time to dodge. He could only block with the burial of Heaven's sword in front of him. Bang, bang. With a muffled sound, Ji Tianqing was sent flying. The South-conquering marshal continued to charge forward towards the envoy of the ruins of God. At this time, Yin Yao swung her two swords and used a secret divine art. Two rays of starlight attacked the South-conquering marshal from both sides. Marshal Jinan raised both of his palms and struck out two mountain-like palm shadows at the two cold lights. Kaboom! The starlight and the palms collapsed at the same time and exploded with a powerful force. The South-conquering marshal took the opportunity to rush in front of Yin Yao and kicked her away. She spat out blood and smashed into the distance. After clearing the two obstacles, the South-conquering marshal continued to charge towards the envoy of the ruins of God. At this time, the Black Dragon and Qian Yu rushed over and blocked the South-conquering marshal's path with their mountain-like bodies. Without saying a word, Marshal Nanjinan punched out a few dark red fish shadows and sent the two flying away. Swoosh! With a flash of red light, the South-conquering marshal teleported 200 miles away and appeared in the sky not far from the envoy of the ruins of God. He looked down at the envoy of the ruins of God from above and raised his palms without hesitation and slashed out two dark red and purple light blades. At this time, 80 breaths had passed, and the envoy of the ruins of God was at the critical moment of casting the spell. He closed his eyes tightly and ignored everything around him as he used all his strength to cast the secret technique. There was no doubt that he had absolute trust in Ji Tianqing, Fairy Yuqing, and the others. In fact, he was already prepared to sacrifice himself. The two light blades from the South-conquering marshal slashed at him with endless divine power, and he didn't even show any signs of dodging. The envoy of the ruins of God was about to be hit by the light blades. Even if he didn't die, he would be seriously injured. At this critical moment, Fairy Yuqing suddenly rushed out from the side. No! She shouted at the top of her lungs and rushed in front of the South-conquering marshal with all her strength. She opened her arms and formed a divine art with both hands to control the ice-blue sea god's shield in front of her. Obviously, she would rather block the South-conquering marshal's attack head-on to protect the envoy of the ruins of God from being disturbed. Boom! In the next moment, two dark red and purple light blades slashed the sea god's shield and exploded with a loud sound that shook the 9 heavens. The two light blades collapsed on the spot, and the sea god's shield was also smashed into pieces, splashing out thousands of pieces. Fairy Yuqing was also sent flying backward, blood spurting out of her mouth and nose. The sea god's shield was shattered, and she also suffered a backlash. Her meridians, organs, and soul were all severely injured. However, she ignored her injuries, and after flying backward for 50 miles, she rushed toward the South-conquering marshal without any regard for her own safety. The South-conquering marshal only had the envoy of the ruins of God in his eyes, and he only wanted to kill him as soon as possible. After all, the turbulence between heaven and earth was getting more and more intense. A powerful aura of death came from the depths of the ground, making him more and more uneasy. Seeing Fairy Yuqing rushing over recklessly, he shouted angrily, "Get lost!" As he spoke, the South-conquering marshal raised his fists and punched at Fairy Yuqing. Bang! With a dull bang, Fairy Yuqing was hit by the dark red fist light and immediately raised her head to spit out blood. Her divine body was also twisted and deformed. Her chest and abdomen were caved in, and her legs were shattered into pieces. End of chapter. Chapter 25:39. Even though Fairy Yuqing was severely injured and her consciousness was blurry, her obsession was deep. No matter what, she had to complete the mission given by the messenger of the divine ruins. With me here, don't even think about taking half a step forward. She raised her blood-stained face and roared in a hoarse voice before rushing towards Marshal Nan again. Even if her legs collapsed and disappeared, her body was deformed, and her entire person was covered in blood. She didn't show the slightest bit of fear or retreat. She resolutely stopped the Southern Expedition Marshal. More than 90 breaths had passed. The wind and clouds surged between heaven and earth, and gray fog covered 800 miles. The aura of death that surged out from the depths of the ground caused this world to be like a frozen domain. It was bone-chilling. On the collapsed ruins, the messenger of the divine ruins had also burned herself. Golden flames surged into the sky, and her body was quickly disappearing. Marshal Nan became more and more anxious, and his heart was burning with worry. The anxiety and fear in his heart were getting stronger and stronger, making him so angry that he almost went crazy. However, Fairy Yuqing desperately blocked in front of him, preventing him from getting close to the messenger of the divine ruins. He finally went berserk and roared hysterically, "Damn bitch, die for me." While roaring, Marshal Nan rushed in front of Fairy Yuqing and raised his fist to punch her. Fairy Yuqing used all her strength to try to dodge the two pairs of giant fists. However, she was powerless. She could only watch as the pair of ferocious fists magnified in her eyes. "Old man, I'll take my leave first," she murmured in her heart, and a sad smile bloomed on her blood-stained face. Bang! In the next moment, Marshal Nan's fists, carrying the power to destroy everything, hit her fiercely. With a deafening sound, Fairy Yuqing's body exploded on the spot, turning into hundreds of millions of pieces of flesh and blood that splashed in the sky. The once peerless fairy, the senior martial god who had cultivated for thousands of years, died just like that. Whether it was her physical body or her soul, they were all smashed into powder and returned to the world. The rain of blood also bloomed with a dazzling, icy blue brilliance and then disappeared. That was the last light of Fairy Yuqing in the world. Finally, no one could stop Marshal Nan. His eyes were red with anger, and he was about to rush over and kill the emissary of the divine ruins. However, 99 breaths of time had passed. When he raised his head to look at the ruins in front of him, he discovered that the emissary of the divine ruins had also disappeared. Within the golden ball of light that was as bright as the scorching sun, the palm-sized black stone tablet seemed to have been weathered. It turned into countless specks of dust and scattered between heaven and earth. The south-conquering marshal was dumbfounded. His body stiffened as he watched this scene. A chill ran down his spine. In the end, he was still a step too late and was unable to stop the emissary of the divine ruins, even though he didn't know what would happen next. However, he had a strong premonition that what was about to happen was no less than the end of the world or the collapse of stars. At the same time, Ji Tianxing, who was not far away, was also stunned. He stood in the sky with a complicated expression. Just now, he was about to rush over to save Fairy Yuqing and stop Marshal Jinan. However, when he was halfway there, the voice of the messenger of the ruins of God rang out in his mind. It was low, solemn, and mysterious. Ji Tianxing, this old man's mission has been completed. From now on, Shenwu continent is in your hands. Always remember that you must never underestimate the 5 elemental realms. A tree that is tens of thousands of feet tall will eventually rise from its roots. The myriad realms in the heavens are like towering trees. The 3,000 realms are the branches, and the 3 great upper realms are the tree's crown. However, the most special and important thing is the tree's roots. These specious words filled Ji Tianxing with confusion. However, he no longer had the chance to ask the emissary of the ruins of God what these words meant. After saying these words, the emissary of the ruins of God, turned into a resplendent golden light and disappeared forever. At this moment, everyone was a little stunned. Ji Tianxing stared at the ruins where the emissary of the ruins of God had disappeared. His heart was filled with complex emotions, and he felt extremely uncomfortable. The South-conquering marshal and General Fu Long stood in the air and looked at each other, their eyes filled with worry. Only the 60 warships, dozens of captains, and thousands of soldiers were immersed in panic. However, they continued to bombard Ji Tianxing and the others even more crazily. Finally, the apocalyptic phenomenon had arrived. Boom! The mountains and rivers that had long since collapsed into ruins suddenly exploded with a loud bang. A gray fog suddenly rushed out from the ground, causing sand and dust to fill the air. In the next instant, the gray fog condensed into a muscular man who was 30 meters tall and wearing divine armor. This figure was formed by the gray fog and was not a corpse. However, it was extremely lifelike and lifelike. Moreover, this person actually had the strength of a martial god. His entire body emitted a cold aura of death. He held a huge broadsword with both hands and stared at the warships in the sky. He opened his mouth and let out an angry roar. Alien race die. The South-conquering marshal and General Fu Long were stunned and frowned. At this moment, a muffled bang sounded from the ruins not far away. A thick gray fog rushed up from the ground into the sky. In the blink of an eye, the gray fog condensed into a lithe and graceful woman. This person was dressed in luxurious clothes and had an exquisite crown on her head. She held a treasured sword in her hand and looked heroic and domineering. Those who oppose me will be killed without mercy. She looked up at the South-conquering marshal and General Fu Long and shouted in a sacred and majestic voice. The South-conquering marshal and General Fu Long turned around and looked at the woman with strange expressions. D***, what's going on? Marshal, these people who came out from the ground are all formed by the gray fog. Why do they have the aura of a martial god? Just as the two of them were feeling confused, waves of gray fog continuously spewed out from the ruins in all directions. Bang, bang, bang. Countless waves of gray fog rushed into the sky and condensed into powerhouses with different appearances. There were humans, goblins, elves, and so on. They were all intelligent races of the Shenwu continent, and there were men and women of all ages. However, these people formed by the gray fog all had a common characteristic. That was, they all had the strength of a martial god or above, and they were all the strongest and most domineering leaders. In just 10 short breaths of time, more than 600 gray fog figures had appeared on the ground in a radius of 400 kilometers. Most of them were martial gods, and there were even a dozen or so true gods. The densely packed gray figures were scattered in all directions, sealing off the area and surrounding the heaven-conquering fleet. The powerhouses of the heaven-conquering fleet were stunned, and the 60 warships stopped attacking at the same time. At this time, a few roars that sounded like muffled thunder came from the ground. The world may be far, but hell is close. Lowly foreign worms, I am willing to send you there. Those who invade the human territory will be punished, no matter how far away they are. Of the 3,000 worlds, only I reign supreme. Hearing these 3 ancient, boundless, and domineering words, everyone looked at the highest mound in the middle of the ruins. They saw 3 extremely sacred and majestic gray figures fly out from the ground and hover in the sky. End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2540. The 3 figures, who were as majestic as mountains and as dignified as gods, stood tall in the sky. The figure on the left was an extraordinarily handsome young man, dressed in a long robe. He was dressed like a scholar. The figure on the right was as sturdy as a mountain. He wore heavy armor and carried a heaven-splitting battle axe on his shoulder. He was indescribably valiant and domineering. The figure in the middle was the leader of the 3. He was a middle-aged man with a burly figure and a dignified face. He wore a luxurious robe and wore an incomparably noble divine crown. His every movement exuded a transcendent aura that seemed to look down on the world and the common people. When he saw these three figures, the Southern Expedition Marshal's expression changed drastically. His eyes were filled with intense shock. The dragon's subduing general's face was also deathly pale, and his eyes were filled with intense fear. Naturally, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku, who were not far away, were also filled with shock and astonishment. After observing for a while, Ji Tianxing's eyes suddenly flashed, and he couldn't help but exclaim, "Those three figures all have the aura of Empyrean gods. They're all." No, they were all Empyrean gods when they were alive. Yun Yao immediately frowned and asked doubtfully, "When they were alive? Tianxing, you mean those 600 figures formed by the gray fog are all deceased Empyrean gods and gods?" Ji Tianxing nodded and said solemnly, "That's right. There are a total of 680 powerhouses, and they were all Empyrean gods, true gods, and Empyrean gods of Shenwu continent when they were alive. Looking at their attire, they should be powerhouses from ancient times. Almost every single one of them is an overlord who is in charge of the world." When they heard this, Yun Yao, Ji Ku, Qian Yu, and Hei Long were somewhat excited, and their hearts were filled with anticipation. Ji Ku hurriedly asked, "Brother Tianxing, since these people were all overlords from ancient times, they should have been dead for tens of thousands of years. How can they appear again?" Ji Tianxing sighed and said with a complicated tone, "I'm not too sure about the specifics, but I'm sure that these experts were all summoned by the emissary of the ruins of God. The emissary of the divine ruins had guarded the divine ruins for thousands of years, and the divine ruins was the place where countless martial gods and divine spirits were buried. He didn't know what method the emissary of the ruins of God had used to summon the gods of the ancient times. Unfortunately, the emissary of the divine ruins sacrificed himself and burned into nothingness." He scanned the sky with a burning gaze and looked around before he continued. "Although the 600 overlords were martial gods, true gods, and heaven gods when they were alive, they were still alive. However, they had been dead for tens of thousands of years. Now, only a wisp of consciousness or remnant soul remained. Their true combat strength was only 1/10 of what it was when they were alive, or even less. Simply put, they should be called war souls, the war souls of the primordial age." Yin Yao nodded and said with relief, "Since the ancient fighting soul has appeared, the five-element world can be saved." Ji Ku also nodded slightly and said with relief, "Even if these ancient fighting souls only had 1/10 of their strength when they were alive, there are still 600 of them. However, there are as many as 660 of them, which is enough to destroy the heaven-conquering fleet." Ji Tianxing said with a complicated tone, "However, after this battle, regardless of whether we win or lose, they will vanish into thin air and be completely obliterated." Upon hearing this, Yin Yao and Ji Ke looked very regretful. Their hearts became heavier and more complicated. At this moment, the great battle finally broke out. Standing high in the sky, the emperor-like heaven god War Soul waved his hand and gave an order in a domineering manner. "All gods, listen to my order. Destroy the foreign tribes and leave no one alive." Following his order, the 600 ancient fighting souls in the sky roared in unison. They waved their weapons and launched an attack. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Endless gray light blades, giant dragons, arrayed discs, and spear shadows surged toward the heaven-conquering fleet like a flood, drowning dozens of battleships. The area within a radius of 1,000 miles was completely covered by a gray fog. It was chaotic. Thousands of heaven-conquering warriors and dozens of captains panicked and launched a counterattack in a flurry. The 60 battleships also fired their cannons randomly and shot out dark red light beams toward the hundreds of ancient fighting souls. Boom, boom, boom. However, the ancient fighting souls were formed by the gray fog and were not made of flesh and blood. Even if they were hit by the dark red light beams and holes appeared in their bodies, they did not feel any pain and continued to charge toward the battleships. Boom! Crack! Crack! Boom! 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 Dozens of ancient fighting souls besieged the battleships one by one and quickly blasted them into pieces. Once the battleships were destroyed, the heaven-conquering warriors and captains who were hiding in them lost their protection. The heaven-conquering warriors in black armor were quickly killed by the ancient fighting souls. They were mercilessly slaughtered. Even the captains who were at the martial god realm could not withstand the attacks of the ancient fighting souls. They were quickly blasted into pieces, and their flesh and blood splattered everywhere. This grand and destructive battle had completely overturned the situation of the battle. Previously, the heaven-conquering tribe had the advantage in numbers, and they had almost killed Ji Tianxing and the others. However, the situation was now completely reversed. The number of ancient fighting souls was several times more than the heaven-conquering tribe, and they had the upper hand. The heaven-conquering fleet was in a mess. The 60 battleships were separated and destroyed one by one. Seeing this, Marshal Nanjinan was enraged. He roared and charged toward the ancient fighting souls. Boom! 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 Marshal Nanjinan used his unique skill and threw out dozens of fist radiance and palm shadows. He killed dozens of ancient fighting souls in one blow. The martial god realm ancient fighting souls were blasted into wisps of gray mist and gradually dissipated into the air. After rescuing one of the battleships, Marshal Nanjinan teleported to another battleship and killed more than 20 ancient fighting souls with his punches and kicks. This scene was witnessed by the 3 heavenly god tier fighting souls. The Emperor Fighting Soul, who was the leader, stared coldly at Marshal Nanjinan and ordered in a deep voice, "Kill the leader of the foreign tribes." The scholar and general who were standing on his left and right cupped their fists and obeyed. They immediately charged toward Marshal Nanjinan and launched a fierce attack. Marshal Nanjinan was entangled and his attacks were blocked. He could not break free from the siege of the 2 heavenly god realm fighting souls. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku did not stay idle. They quickly charged toward Marshal Nanjinan. The 3 of them were severely injured and covered in blood. They looked miserable. However, Marshal Nanjinan was also severely injured. He was shuttling through the battlefield, trying to escape the siege of the ancient fighting souls. He had just dodged the siege of a few ancient fighting souls and was about to charge toward a battleship. Swoosh! 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 Ji Tianxing, Yun Yao, and Ji Ku suddenly appeared. They surrounded him from 3 directions and launched an attack. Marshal Nanjinan, it's time for you to die. Ji Tianxing shouted coldly. He waved the burial of heaven's sword and stabbed out. Yun Yao waved her 2 swords and shot out 2 silver stars. Ji Ku also held the origin stone divine spear and stabbed out the burning heaven flame with all his might. Marshal Nanjinan's life was on the line. Chapter 25:41. At the moment of life and death, General Dragon, subduing, was terrified and terrified. His eyes widened in anger as he subconsciously shouted, "Grand Marshal, save me." Given his current condition, he definitely wouldn't be able to block the combined attacks of Ji Tianxing and his wife. Only death awaited him. And on the battlefield, only the South-conquering Marshal was strong enough to save his life. Unfortunately, the South-conquering Marshal was besieged by the scholar and general. He was under pressure to block the attacks and didn't have time to care about anything else. Seeing this, General Dragon, subduing, knew that he didn't have long to live. He could only give it his all and fight to the death. "Ji Tianxing, I'll fight you to the death." He roared as if he had gone crazy. His entire body ignited with blood flames as he pounced toward Ji Tianxing with both hands holding onto his saber. Heaven-destroying slash. Endless blood flames surged out of the cold, pitch-black saber, condensing into a 5-kilometer-long saber that slashed toward Ji Tianxing. If Ji Tianxing didn't dodge, even if he didn't die, he would be severely injured. But if Ji Tianxing dodged, General Dragon, subduing, would have a chance to live. He was betting. He was betting that Ji Tianxing wouldn't dare to take that attack. However, he immediately realized something. He was wrong. Ji Tianxing turned a blind eye to the giant blood-red blade and slashed down with a heaven barrier's sword with both hands. Boom! Boom! Kaboom! In the next instant, Ji Tianxing, Yin Yao, and Ji Ku's attacks all hit General Dragon Subduing, resulting in 3 earth-shattering explosions. General Dragon Subduing's body collapsed on the spot, exploding into pieces that scattered in the sky. Then, the 5-kilometer-long blood-red saber hit Ji Tianxing squarely. However, it hit Ji Tianxing's shoulder, and he was wearing the energy stone armor, which protected his head and body tightly. Boom! With a loud explosion, the blood-red light blade collapsed and shattered into pieces. Ji Tianxing was also sent flying by the violent force, tumbling dozens of times before coming to a stop. He was only slightly injured. He opened his mouth and coughed a few times. A trace of blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. However, the dragon-subduing general paid the price with his life and died just like that. I've finally gotten rid of this thorn in my side. It was worth it. Ji Tianxing raised his hand to wipe off the blood on his face and murmured coldly. At this time, Yin Yao and Ji Ku flew to his side and said with concern, "Tianxing, your injuries are too serious. We should retreat. Brother Tianxing, leave this to the ancient fighting soul. Let's retreat to a safe place." Ji Tianxing looked around and saw the scene of flesh and blood splattering everywhere in the misty gray world. Even though the number of ancient fighting souls was decreasing rapidly, at any moment, there would be people disintegrating into gray mist and vanishing on the spot. However, the casualties of the heaven-conquering fleet were even more severe. The wreckage of the battleships and the remains of the heaven-conquering fleet soldiers could be seen everywhere on the ground that had turned into ruins. In the sky, there were only slightly more than 20 battleships that were still intact. In such a short period of time, the ancient fighting souls had destroyed more than 30 battleships and killed more than 3,000 heaven-conquering fleet soldiers. Even Ji Tianxing was shocked by this result. He turned to look at Yin Yao and Ji Ku and said in a serious tone, "The two of you should retreat far away. You don't have to participate in the battle anymore. Just kill the escaping heaven-conquering fleet members." The 2 girls looked worried and asked in unison, "What about you?" Ji Tianxing said in a serious tone, "I can't leave yet. I have to take this opportunity to use the ancient fighting souls to kill the southern conquering fleet marshal. This person is a true god. If we don't kill him, there will be endless trouble in the future." Yin Yao and Ji Ku hurriedly said, "All right, we'll stay and deal with him with you." Ji Tianxing shook his head and persuaded them, "You're already at the end of your rope. Your injuries are so serious. If you don't retreat now, your divine Tao foundation will be affected." The 2 girls could not persuade him. They could only follow his instructions and quickly retreat from the battlefield. They only stopped when they were a few hundred miles away. Seeing that the 2 of them were safe, Ji Tianxing held the sword of burial of heaven and silently charged toward the southern conquering fleet marshal. "Damn bastards! Ben Shuai will definitely annihilate all of you who refuse to die." The southern conquering fleet marshal cursed as he fought with the 2 ancient fighting souls. During this period of time, the 2 of them had already exchanged more than 1,000 blows. The southern conquering fleet marshal had been forced to retreat more than 100 miles. Moreover, his armor was already damaged. His body was covered in wounds, and blood was flowing profusely. The scholar and general were silent. They focused on attacking and swore to kill the southern conquering fleet marshal in the shortest time possible. Unfortunately, they were only ancient fighting souls. The power of the gray fog was very limited. They could not use heaven and earth, the 5 elements, and various divine powers. Moreover, as time passed, their combat power gradually weakened. The southern conquering fleet marshal realized this and did not fight with the 2 ancient fighting souls. He kept moving around and fighting. Finally, Ji Tianxing seized an opportunity and attacked decisively. Sword through heaven. He teleported behind the southern conquering fleet marshal. He held the sword of burial of heaven with both hands and fiercely stabbed out a dazzling golden sword ray. The Southern conquering fleet marshal sensed that something was wrong. It was too late for him to dodge. At the critical moment, he could only twist his body to avoid his chest and vital parts. Poof! Following a sound of defeat, the dazzling golden sword ray pierced the Southern conquering fleet marshal's left hind leg. Boom! The dazzling golden sword ray instantly exploded, bursting out with destructive power. There was no doubt that the Southern conquering fleet marshal's left hind leg exploded into countless pieces of flesh and blood that splashed in the sky. Unparalleled pain assaulted him, causing him to twitch all over. He couldn't help but let out a blood-curdling scream. He was sent flying by the impact. He glared at Ji Tianxing and cursed furiously. Ji Tianxing, you despicable bastard! Ji Tianxing turned a deaf ear to him and disappeared in a flash. He hid in the alternate space and lurked at the side, waiting for the next opportunity to attack. The Southern conquering fleet marshal wanted to look for him. However, he was entangled by the two ancient fighting souls and could not escape. He was furious. After hesitating for a while, he gritted his teeth and made up his mind. Heaven fighting wings! The Southern conquering fleet marshal roared. He did not hesitate to burn 1,000 years of his life to use this secret skill to stimulate his bloodline and potential. Swoosh! His entire body was ignited with a blood flame that soared into the sky, and a pair of fiery red wings grew out of his back and covered the sky. The wings were long and sharp. The edges of the wings were like blades. They exuded a dangerous aura that could tear everything apart. When the scholar and general attacked again, the Southern conquering fleet marshal flapped the heaven-fighting wings with all his might and slashed at them like blades. Swoosh! Swoosh! The two ancient fighting souls could not dodge in time. They were instantly cut into two by the heaven-fighting wings. However, the two halves of their bodies quickly gathered back together and became whole again. Their auras were obviously weakened, and their combat power was greatly reduced. When they attacked the Southern conquering fleet marshal again, they were already powerless. Seeing this, the ancient fighting soul in the sky, who was dressed as an emperor, formed a sword with gray mist and joined the battle personally. Chapter 2542. Die! The ancient fighting soul in the emperor's attire bellowed in anger. He descended from the sky with a huge gray mist sword in his hands and slashed at Marshal Nan. Marshal Nan was defending himself from the attacks of the scholar and general and had no time to dodge the attack of the emperor's fighting soul. Boom! Crack! With a deafening explosion, the Southern Expedition Marshal was sent flying on the spot. Blood spurted out from his mouth and nose. He flew for more than 100 miles before he managed to neutralize the impact and stopped in the sky. Before he could counterattack, the Emperor's fighting soul charged at him again with his sword and slashed out a huge number of gray shadows. The scholar and general followed closely behind and attacked the Southern Expedition Marshal without caring about anything else. Both parties fought in the sky and caused the sky to crumble and the ground to crack as gray mist filled the sky. Ji Tianxing took the opportunity to attack one battleship after another. With the indestructible sword of Burial of Heaven, he slashed many battleships in half and smashed them into pieces. A large number of soldiers in black armor flew out from the wreckage of the battleships and fell into the sky. Soon, they were drowned by the ancient fighting souls. After a few minutes, the remaining dozen battleships were destroyed by Ji Tianxing. The heaven-defeating fleet was about to be destroyed. There were only over 1,000 soldiers in black armor and more than 30 captains who were still putting up a desperate struggle. The number of ancient fighting souls had decreased by more than 200. Ji Tianxing charged forward without any regard for his own safety. He fought a bloody battle in the sky, vowing to kill everyone in the heaven-conquering fleet before the ancient war spirit perished. Swoosh! A dazzling golden sword radiance shone into the crowd and gave off a dazzling brilliance. More than 20 soldiers in black armor were smashed into pieces by the sword radiance, and blood splattered all over the sky. Bam! 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 Ji Tianxing executed a draconic elephant divine fist. The mountain-sized draconic elephant phantoms immediately bombarded more than 30 black-armored warriors. The soldiers in black armor exploded and were smashed into pieces. Swish, 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 swish. The god-slaying flying dagger turned into a ray of golden radiance and shuttled through the sky under the control of Ji Tianxing's spiritual thought. The golden light pierced through one black-armored warrior after another, piercing through their chests with unerring accuracy. An incomparably violent power exploded within the bodies of the black-armored warriors, blasting their bodies into smithereens. Similar scenes continued to play out in the sky. As time passed, the number of soldiers and captains of the heaven-conquering army dwindled. Finally, half an hour passed. There were only over 300 black-armored warriors, 8 silver-armored captains, and close to 100 ancient war souls left. The Heaven Punishers were utterly defeated. The 8 captains and the many black-armored warriors were all covered in wounds, unable to hold on any longer. The battle intent in their hearts was extinguished. They only wanted to escape from this place as soon as possible and save their lives. However, how could Ji Tianxing give up? He took the lead and chased after them, unleashing all kinds of ultimate skills with all his might. The ancient fighting souls also whizzed over and chased after the heaven-conquering warriors. The two sides chased each other for a quarter of an hour before the battle gradually came to a stop. All the black-armored warriors were killed, and the 8 captains were also blasted into smithereens, dying without a complete corpse. At this point, only the Southern Expedition Marshal was left of the heaven-destroying fleet that invaded the Five Elements world. The number of ancient fighting souls had also decreased to over 30. Moreover, these ancient fighting souls' bodies were all broken. The gray fog was thin, and their strength was constantly draining. Their mission had been completed, and they were about to dissipate. Ji Tianxing's gaze swept across the ancient fighting souls. He did not see a trace of depression or pain. The ancient fighting souls' expressions revealed a relieved and gratified expression. It was obvious that they did not care about their own survival at all. As long as they could expel the foreign enemies and protect the Five Elements world, they would be satisfied. After all, they had been dead for tens of thousands of years. Ji Tianxing was a little emotional. He thought to himself, what kind of world is the Five Elements world? What charm does it have to be able to make the ancient gods so loyal to protect it? No one could answer this question. He could only wait for a chance in the future to solve the mystery himself. He quickly collected his thoughts and flew high into the sky. In the sky, thousands of miles away, the 3 ancient fighting souls were still besieging the Southern Expedition Marshal. The sky was dark and the earth was dark. The gray fog covered the sky and the earth, covering a radius of 3,000 miles and emitting a cold aura of death. Ji Tianxing came closer and realized that the figures of scholar and general were already blurred. Their bodies were also broken and incomplete. There was no doubt that their strength had been greatly weakened, and they were not far from death. Even so, they were still fearless and did not retreat at all. They still attacked without caring about their own safety, causing great pressure to the Southern Expedition Marshal. The ancient fighting soul's body was also thin, and its strength was constantly overflowing. However, it was still domineering. It used both its fists and sword to launch a fierce attack. Its moves were bold and powerful. The Southern Expedition Marshal was completely suppressed by it and was forced to retreat. His entire body was covered with hideous wounds, revealing many broken bones. Blood kept gushing out. Even his heaven-fighting wings were torn with more than 10 cracks and more than 20 holes. Its power was greatly reduced. As Ji Tianxing arrived and joined the battle with the Sword of Burial of Heaven, the Southern Expedition Marshal could not hold on anymore. Ji Tianxing used the same trick again. He still hid his aura and hid in the dark to look for an opportunity. When the time was right, he suddenly appeared and launched a fatal attack. Absolute shadows of 10 directions. Life-rising sword. The illusory sword seemed to fly from the sky with dazzling golden light and endless divine power. The Southern Expedition Marshal had just been pushed back by the ancient fighting soul and was rolling in the sky. When Ji Tianxing's superb sword attack came, he sensed that something was wrong. However, it was too late for him to dodge. Bam! With a dull explosion, the sword light pierced through the heaven-fighting wings and pierced through the Southern Expedition Marshal's ribs. The incomparably violent power tore two huge gaps in the heaven-fighting wings, extending long and narrow cracks. Two huge bloody holes appeared on the Southern Expedition Marshal's ribs as well. Shards of flesh and blood splattered out and scattered in the sky. Naturally, his internal organs were also severely injured and were crushed by the sword light. The heart-wrenching pain caused the Southern Expedition Marshal to raise his head and roar, letting out a mournful howl. Ji Tianxing, it's you again, you bastard. You despicable bastard. What else can you do other than sneak attack? The Southern Expedition Marshal flew backward for hundreds of miles before he could stand still. He glared at Ji Tianxing and roared hysterically. Ji Tianxing looked at him expressionlessly and said coldly, "It's enough to kill you." As soon as he finished speaking, he rushed toward the Southern Expedition Marshal. He waved the sword of burial of heaven and stabbed the Southern Expedition Marshal. The three ancient fighting souls also rushed forward and surrounded the Southern Expedition Marshal. They launched a fierce attack. The Southern Expedition Marshal was at the end of his rope. His strength was extremely weak. He tried his best to hold on for a while and found a chance to counterattack. He defeated the scholar and the general. The two ancient fighting souls were destroyed on the spot. They turned into endless gray fog and disappeared from the world. Chapter 25:43. After the two war souls were destroyed, the Southern Expedition Marshal was only left with Ji Tianxing and the Emperor War Soul. Although the pressure on the Southern Expedition Marshal was greatly reduced, his energy was almost depleted and he could not turn the tables. Kaboom! He used all his strength and clashed head-on with the Emperor War Soul. There was a thunderous explosion and a destructive shockwave. The sky was torn apart, and a pitch-black crack that was dozens of miles long appeared. Endless heavenly fire and astral winds poured down like a flood, drowning the Southern Expedition Marshal and the Emperor War Soul. The Southern Expedition Marshal's left arm was shattered, and his chest caved in, revealing a cluster of broken bones. The Emperor War Soul was also severely injured. Its body became thinner, and its energy was greatly weakened. It could only hold on for another 15 minutes at most before it died. However, the Southern Expedition Marshal could not hold on for that long. Ji Tianxing, it's all thanks to you that this Marshal ended up like this. The Southern Expedition Marshal stared at Ji Tianxing with hatred and shouted in a hoarse voice, "Ben Shuai will remember today's humiliation forever. If I don't tear you into pieces, Ben Shuai will not have the face to continue living in this world. I'll let you live today. When Ben Shuai comes to the Five Elements world again, it will be your death. Ben Shuai, remember this. Everything in the Purple Cloud Star Zone is the heaven-conquering territory. The Five Elements world is no exception." After saying this, the Southern Expedition Marshal turned around without hesitation and entered the crack in space. He held a few pitch-black dawn stones in his left hand and an ancient tether sky plate in his right. He activated the power of the tether sky plate. Swoosh! The tether sky plate gave off a dazzling red light and released a powerful energy wave. The Southern Expedition Marshal entered the tether sky plate and sped through the heavenly wind and fire layer. He was as fast as a shooting star. With the protection of the tether sky plate, the Southern Expedition Marshal successfully passed through the void storm and heavenly fire and headed straight for the golden light barrier thousands of miles away. He was already severely injured and could not continue fighting with Ji Tianxing. Otherwise, he would be in danger of dying. His top priority right now was to escape from the Five Elements world and return to the Purple Cloud Star. Seeing that Marshal Jinan was running away, Ji Tianxing did not hesitate to rush into the heavenly windfire layer and started to chase after him. However, a dense void storm surged over and blocked his path. At the same time, the raging heavenly flames rushed over like a flood, slowing down his flying speed. Even though he had a special divine body and wasn't afraid of being eroded by the heavenly fire and the astral wind, he still couldn't do anything. However, it was difficult for him to move in the heavenly astral wind-fire layer. He could not increase his speed and could not catch up to the tether void plate. Damn it, where did he get so many origin stones? Ji Tianxing gnashed his teeth in hatred, a cold light flashing in his eyes. After thinking for a while, he remembered that he had used 300 origin stones to set up the divine formation on the ancient gazing platform. Later on, the ancient gazing platform was destroyed by the heaven-conquering fleet, and the divine formation was also shattered. Many origin stones were scattered all over the place. He didn't want the origin stones to fall into the hands of the heaven punishers, so he had only managed to retrieve 100 or so origin stones. There were still more than 100 left, and they were all scattered among the ruins. Marshal Jinan was here for the origin stones, so he naturally would not let go of them. When he thought of this, Ji Tianxing understood the reason, and his heart was filled with unwillingness. Damn it, if I can't kill Marshal Jinan this time, I won't have another chance in the future. He was filled with anxiety and worry as he tried his best to increase his speed, traveling through the heavenly astral wind-fire layer. However, even if he exploded with his fastest speed, he could not catch up to the tether void plate. When he was still 2,000 miles away from the golden light barrier, the tether void plate had already reached it. Under Marshal Jinan's control, the tether void plate spun rapidly, like a giant blood-red gear, and slammed into the golden light barrier. Kaboom! With a loud explosion, the golden light barrier was broken by the tether void plate, and a 1,000-foot-long, 10-meter-wide ravine appeared. Whoosh! The tether void plate successfully passed through the ravine, leaving the five elements world and entering the dark, cold void. Marshal Jinan was temporarily out of danger, but he did not dare to relax. He madly absorbed the energy of the origin stones and desperately activated the tether void plate, exploding with extreme speed as he sped through the void. Ji Tianxing did not give up. He passed through the ravine in the golden light barrier and chased into the void. However, he was still too slow and could not catch up to the tether void plate. Instead, he was left further and further behind. An hour later, he had chased for 80,000 miles before the tether void plate finally shook him off. The two were tens of thousands of miles apart. No matter how hard Ji Tianxing tried, he could not catch up. Moreover, he was heavily injured and had used up all of his divine power. If he continued to chase in the void, he might very well use up all of his energy and fall into a desperate situation. Moreover, the ravine in the tether void plate would close soon. Helpless, Ji Tianxing could only suppress his anger and unwillingly give up the chase. He stood in the void with a pale face, watching the tether void plate disappear into the darkness before turning around and flying back to the five elements world. Whoosh! Before the ravine closed, Ji Tianxing passed through the golden light barrier and returned to the five elements world. He passed through the heavenly wind and fire layer and returned to the ruins of God, appearing on the battlefield. The world was still filled with wisps of gray fog. However, all 660 war souls had disappeared. Even the ancient war soul in the emperor's attire had died long ago. Ji Tianxing stood high in the sky and looked down at the vast land within a few thousand miles. A strong sense of desolation rose in his heart. It's all over, he muttered silently. His expression and tone were rather bleak. Although the human race had won and destroyed the invading heaven-destroying fleet and severely injured the Southern Expedition Marshal. However, Ji Tianxing could not feel happy. He even felt a little sad. After all, Fairy Yuqing had sacrificed herself, and Marshal God Taihao had died in battle. In order to summon the ancient war souls, the emissary of the ruins of God had also burned his divine body and divine soul and sacrificed his life. Now only he, Yin Yao, Jiku, Qinyu, and Black Dragon were still alive. Moreover, like everyone else, he had suffered extremely heavy injuries. If he did not go into seclusion to recuperate in time, he was afraid that there would be future troubles. Not long after, two rays of light, one blue and one red, flew over from afar. It was Yin Yao and Jiku. The two of them landed beside Ji Tianxing and size him up with concern. Seeing that his injuries were serious, but his life was not in danger, the two of them were slightly relieved. Tianxing, your injuries are too serious. Quickly return to the divine pagoda to recuperate. Although the southern expedition marshal escaped, we destroyed the heaven-destroying fleet and protected the five elements world again. The sacrifices of Senior Fairy Yuqing, and Martial God Taihao were all worth it. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly. Yun Yao continued. Just now, we cleaned up the battlefield and found the relics of Senior Fairy Yuqing and Senior Fairy Yuqing. After we heal, I will send Fairy Yuqing's relics back to Yuqing Heaven. Moreover, we will build a mausoleum for the three martial gods on this battlefield and write down their achievements on the tombstones for future generations to worship. Chapter 2544. Moments later, Ji Tianxing summoned the small golden tower and brought everyone back into the divine tower. Everyone entered the distorted space-time on the 6th floor and went into seclusion to recuperate. Although everyone's injuries were quite severe, to the point where their lives were in danger and their power was almost depleted, they still had plenty of resources. They even had a large number of origin stones at their disposal. As time passed, everyone's injuries gradually improved, and their divine power quickly recovered. The outside world was peaceful. Shenwu continent was as peaceful as ever, and it had not been affected in any way. In fact, no one knew about the great battle that had taken place in the ruins of God. Moreover, no one could have imagined that there had once been a peerlessly valiant heaven-destroying fleet that had invaded the five elements world in a grandiose manner. The two remaining martial gods of the five elemental realm had sacrificed their lives for this cause. It wasn't until a month later that news spread from the boundless divine kingdom. Martial God Taihao had fought a fierce battle with the fleet in the ruins of God in order to resist the invasion of the heaven-conquering army. In the end, he had died in battle. When this news spread, the entire Shenwu continent was shaken, and the three divine kingdoms were in an uproar. Countless martial artists were shocked, and the martial arts world was abuzz with discussion. The citizens of the boundless divine kingdom were all covered in mourning, and they were all grieving. At the same time, news of the invasion of the heaven-conquering army and the sacrifice of the human race's martial god spread throughout the continent. Only then did the people of the various races realize that the peace and tranquility in their eyes had been exchanged with the blood and lives of the martial gods. In this world, how could there be peace and tranquility? It was just that there were people moving forward in places that no one could see. 3 months later, Shenwu continent regained its peace. News of the great battle and the fall of the three martial gods gradually died down. At this time, Ji Tianxing and the others had already been in seclusion in the Divine Tower for 12 years. Everyone's injuries had completely healed, and their divine power had also recovered to its peak. Thus, Ji Tianxing personally went to the boundless divine kingdom to announce a decree. Martial God Taihao had fallen and sacrificed himself to protect Shenwu continent. This merit and virtue should be a model for all martial artists in the world, and the people of the future would remember it for all eternity. However, the survival of the boundless divine kingdom required a wise ruler to inherit the throne and maintain the unity of the kingdom and protect its 10 billion citizens. Thus, the seventh godchild, Taihao Yunqi, would inherit the throne and become the boundless divine kingdom's second divine lord. After this decree was issued, everyone in the divine nation obeyed it. All the people knew that the seventh godchild was honest and benevolent. He was the perfect candidate for a wise ruler. Moreover, the seventh godchild had a close relationship with martial god Tianxing and was greatly appreciated and cared for by martial god Tianxing. Most importantly, it was an order from martial god Tianxing. Martial god Tianxing was the #1 powerhouse in the world, and he was also a great hero who had saved Shenwu continent multiple times. Who would dare to disobey his golden words and jade words? Even though the few brothers of Taihao Yunqi were unhappy with the decree and were against it, they were still unwilling to accept it. After all, those divine sons were also very outstanding and talented. They also had their own forces and wings. However, they did not dare to openly refute him, let alone criticize Ji Tianxing's decision. After all, Ji Tianxing was the embodiment of justice, and he was also the protector of Shenwu continent and the Five Elements realm. If anyone was stupid enough to resist him, they would be cutting themselves off from the people of the divine nation and would be attacked by all the martial artists in the world. This matter was thus decided. Before the Taihao divine nation could stir up any unrest, it regained its calm. Half a month later, martial god Tianxing personally arrived at the central region of the ruins of God with Yun Yao and Ji Ku. Under martial god Tianxing's orders, the 800 Earth Spirit craftsmen used only 3 days and 3 nights to build a magnificent mausoleum on the ruins of the gazing ancient platform. Within the mausoleum were the relics of the emissary of the ruins of God, Fairy Yu Qing, and martial god Taihao. On the 1,000-meter-tall stone tablet, the life stories and achievements of the 3 martial gods were engraved. Rows of flamboyant and majestic words were personally written and engraved by Ji Tianxing with the sword of burial of heaven. After the mausoleum was built, Ji Tianxing personally set up a divine formation to protect the mausoleum from being damaged. In this way, the mausoleum would exist forever, standing tall on the ruins of the battlefield for future generations to admire for 1,000 years. After settling this matter, Ji Tianxing tried to use all sorts of methods to search for clues about the graveyard of the gods. After all, the emissary of the ruins of God had fallen, and there was no one left to guard the graveyard of the gods. Before his death, he had never entrusted anything related to the graveyard of the gods. With the appearance of the ancient war spirit, Ji Tianxing believed that the graveyard of the gods was hiding a huge secret. He really wanted to find the entrance to the graveyard of the gods and solve this mystery. Unfortunately, the graveyard of the gods seemed to have disappeared, but it also seemed to exist in a different space. Even though Ji Tianxing searched the surrounding 50,000 kilometers and probed 10,000 kilometers into the ground with his divine sense, he still could not find any clues. Regretfully, he could only temporarily put this matter aside and think about it in the future. In the blink of an eye, 3 months passed. Every day, cultivators from all over the continent would arrive at the gazing ancient platform and kowtow before the mausoleum to pay respects to the 3 martial gods. The life stories of the 3 martial gods also spread throughout the Shenwu continent. At this time, a major event occurred in the Jiuqianten Absolute's Tower. It was an extremely joyous occasion. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao's child, which had been in Yun Yao's womb for over 100 years, had finally been born. When Chun Shun and Yao were born, the sun in the sky was as bright as gold, and multicolored auspicious clouds had gathered for millions of kilometers. There were also phantoms of 9 dragons and 9 phoenixes that danced around the sun. Such an earth-shattering, unprecedented phenomenon of heaven and earth lasted for 3 whole days before it dissipated. During these 3 days, the golden sun did not set, and day and night were indistinguishable. Half of the people on the Shenwu continent were able to see this miracle, and they were extremely excited. Legends of the dragons and phoenixes began to spread among the commoners and the martial world. Such an unprecedented phenomenon of heaven and earth was the pinnacle of auspicious omens. Billions of commoners and cultivators believed that this was the will of the heavens. This proved that the Shenwu continent and the Five Elements realm were blessed by the heavens and would prosper for a long time. After this event, news spread from the ruins of God. It turned out that the birth of God, Tianxing, and Yun Yao's child had caused this auspicious omen. At that moment, the entire Shenwu continent was in an uproar. Everyone was ecstatic, and they excitedly spread the news. All the empires and martial arts forces sent their envoys to Sky Pillar Mountain with their most precious gifts to congratulate Li Mu. The Huanglong Taoist and the disciples of Tianzhu Mountain also happily held a feast to celebrate the birth of the divine children. For a moment, the entire Shenwu continent was immersed in joy. All cultivators and commoners, regardless of race, nation, or power, sincerely congratulated and celebrated the birth of the child. This could be said to be a true celebration for the entire continent. However, Ji Tianxing and his wife, as well as the two children, did not appear. No one knew that the noble, intelligent, and courageous god Tianxing was currently fretting over the names of his two children. He had no other choice, as the two children were freaks that had never been seen before. The moment they were born, the heavens had sent down an extremely auspicious phenomenon. If he did not give them indomitable and awe-inspiring names, then he would be letting down their powerful backgrounds. End of chapter. Chapter 25:45. In the twisted space. Yun Yao, who was dressed in white, was leaning on the white jade bed in a relaxed posture. She was frowning as if she was thinking about something. Two delicate and cute babies wrapped in swaddling clothes were lying side by side beside Yun Yao. Ji Tianxing stood beside the jade bed and paced back and forth with his hands behind his back. He was in a state of contemplation. After a while, Ji Tianxing stopped and said with a bitter smile, "Sigh, it's really a pity that we don't have enough knowledge when it's time to use it. I've thought about it, and thousands of names have popped up in my mind, but none of them are suitable for our children." Yun Yao frowned slightly and said earnestly, "Tianxing, I've thought about it for a long time, and I have an idea in mind." Go ahead." Ji Tianxing nodded and looked at her with shining eyes. Yun Yao said in a solemn tone, "Chunshan and Yaya were born after 100 years of gestation. On the day of their birth, they even caused the auspicious omen of 9 dragons and 9 phoenixes. It's the pinnacle of the world. From ancient times until now, there hasn't been such a lucky person. As the saying goes, when the moon is full, it will be in the opposite direction. If you give them arrogant and domineering names, such as Ji Wudi, Ji Lingtian, Ji Tsangxiong, etc., I'm very worried that the two children are so young and can't bear such a great blessing. So, I think we don't have to worry about this matter. Let's give them as ordinary names as possible." Ji Tianxing thought for a while and nodded slightly. Yao, what you said makes sense. How about this? I'll write down all the names that I thought of before. We'll use the method of drawing lots to decide the names of the two children. As for what they'll be called, it'll be up to the will of the heavens. What do you think? Yin Yao thought for a while and nodded. That's good too. Let's leave it to the heavens to decide. Then, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and shot out 6 rays of golden light. They condensed into golden mirrors and floated in the air. Every golden mirror had a name on it. It couldn't be seen from the outside. Only by opening the golden mirror could one see it. Ji Tianxing pointed at the golden mirror of 6 paths and said, Yao, there are 6 names here, all suitable for Yaya. You pick one for her." Yin Yao glanced at those golden mirrors. After hesitating for a while, she waved her hand and picked up a golden mirror. With a flick of her finger, she opened the golden mirror. Instantly, 3 golden words appeared. Ji Wushuang. Yin Yao stared at the 3 characters with a joyful expression. She read aloud, Ji Wushuang. From now on, our daughter will be called Ji Wushuang. Ji Tianxing was also quite satisfied. He nodded and said, although Wushuang is domineering, it is the decision of the heavens, which proves that Yaya is blessed. She is our daughter and the most precious pearl in our palm. Naturally, she is unparalleled and unique in the world. Then he shot out 6 more golden lights, which condensed into 6 golden mirrors and flew into the air. The names in these 6 golden mirrors are suitable for boys. Yao, you pick one for Qinshin. Yin Yao didn't hesitate this time. She waved her hand and picked up a golden mirror, opening it. Then 3 more golden words flew out. Ji Wuhan. Yin Yao stared at the golden words and murmured the 3 words Ji Wuhan. She nodded slightly and said, this name is good. Although it is not as domineering as Wu Shuang, it will not affect Qinshin's fortune. Ji Tianxing smiled and nodded. The affairs of the world are unpredictable and full of ups and downs. Life is full of all kinds of tastes and little joy. But I ask for no worries and no hatred. Everything will be according to my heart. Yin Yao reached out and picked up the sleeping Qinshin. A smile appeared on her pretty face, suffused with motherly radiance. She murmured in a low voice, Qinshin, you will be called Ji Wuhan from now on. We know very well that the world is dangerous and martial arts are difficult. If we want to reach the peak, we must endure all kinds of hardships. But we don't ask for you to rule the world in the future. We only ask that you can grow up healthily, be happy and worry-free, and live a peaceful life. The names of the two children were thus decided. Ji Tianxing and Yun Yao were no longer conflicted, although the two babies were often in a state of deep sleep. However, within their small bodies, there was an unparalleled amount of magic power. They had just been born, and they already possessed magic power comparable to that of a martial saint. The most important thing was that the aptitudes and innate gifts of the two children were unique and perfect. They were born with spotless divine bodies, and their bodies and spirits were untainted by any impurities. They were also impervious to poison. It was not an exaggeration to say that, with their innate gifts and comprehension, they could learn any technique in one go. They could even draw inferences about other techniques and master them through a comprehensive study. In a few years at most, when they were about 6 years old, they would begin to cultivate. By then, they would definitely advance by leaps and bounds. Over the next few years, Shenwu continent regained its peace and tranquility. Yun Yao continued to take care of the two children. In her free time, she would cultivate in seclusion and try to break through to the realm of true gods. Ji Tianxing often cultivated in seclusion in the distorted space-time. After more than 100 years of bitter cultivation, he had finally reached the peak of the martial god realm. He was only one step away from breaking through to the realm of true gods. However, even after he left the divine tower and entered the ruins of God, the laws of heaven and earth still did not descend. Without being tempered by the laws of heaven and earth, he naturally could not break through to the realm of true gods. Ji Ku, Qian Yu, and the Black Dragon had cultivated in the distorted space-time for more than 100 years, and they had all reached the 9th level of the martial god realm. As for the White Dragon, he was in the hidden dragon abyss, guarding the sea of lava and supervising the humans in the Earth's core to excavate origin stones. However, he did not fall behind in his cultivation. Every year, he would return to the distorted space-time and cultivate in seclusion for a long time. In addition to his innate gifts and comprehension, he had also recovered to the 9th level of the martial god realm. In the summer of the 4th year, the Jinshan king suddenly sent a message asking to see Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing entered the sword world to take a look and found that the Jinshan king had already completed his mission. The Jinshan king and the entire Earth Spirit Tribe's craftsmen had spent many years of hard work and energy to finally create a pitch-black origin stone divine ship that was 9,000 feet long. This divine ship was completely made of origin stones, and its quality surpassed that of a true god. The divine ship's lines were elegant and smooth, and its appearance was mysterious and special. It was like a divine sword that stood between heaven and earth and suppressed the ancient times. On the surface, it looked like a 9,000 feet long battleship. However, in reality, the size of the battleship could be changed at will, and the internal space could be expanded by 100 times. Just like the alternate space, it could even fit a mountain range that was 10,000 miles long. After Ji Tianxing checked the divine ship carefully, he was very satisfied and pleased. He rewarded the Jinshan king and the Earth Spirit Tribe's craftsmen heavily. He personally named this battleship the Tianxing Battleship. One day later, Ji Tianxing took the Tianxing Battleship and returned to the distorted space-time. Next, he put aside everything and focused on performing divine skills to add restriction arrays to the battleship. 1 year had passed in the outside world, but he had been busy in the distorted space-time for 50 years. He had used 50 years to add 99 restriction arrays to the battleship. Among them, there were more than 30 offensive divine arrays, more than 30 defensive divine arrays, and more than 30 functional ones. With the 99 restriction arrays, the power of the Tianxing battleship had increased by several times, and its functions had also increased. From then on, Ji Tianxing could use this divine ship to travel freely in the starry sky and travel through the universe. Chapter 2546. Unknowingly, 5 years had already passed. During these 5 years, Shinwu continent's development had become increasingly prosperous, and it was on the verge of returning to its former glory. The 3 divine kingdoms were stable, and their systems were sound. There were basically no major issues that the divine masters needed to worry about. Dark North Mountain had completely declined. The few surviving demons had all hidden themselves in dangerous places and suffered in torment. They no longer dared to show their faces in public. Tianju Mountain was also rapidly expanding, and its development was extremely prosperous. In fact, Tianju Mountain's power had even surpassed what it had been 1,000 years ago. After the Huanglong Taoist had become a martial god, he had taken over the position of sect master and commanded great authority. He now had more than 20,000 disciples, 500 tribes and cities under his control, and more than 300 million people. On the other side, Chun Shun and Yi were also 5 years old. The 2 children were growing up healthily. Chun Shun resembled Yun Yao in that he was exceptionally handsome and had a noble and divine temperament. Yi's appearance was more like Ji Tianxing's. Not only was she very beautiful, but she was also very clever and cute. As the 2 of them gradually grew up, they gradually displayed unparalleled talent and intelligence. Although they had not yet begun to cultivate, they had only learned the languages of the various races and understood the customs and culture of the 5 elements realm. However, they had photographic memories, and their small brains could hold information that was as deep as the ocean without a trace of confusion. Even their personalities were gradually being revealed. Chun Shun had been handsome and cold since he was young. He did not speak much, but he was very calm and wise. Yi was a natural beauty, and she would definitely grow up to be like Yin Yao and be known as the world's #1 beauty. Her personality was kind, lively, and cute. She was also a little eccentric, and she would often say things that made people laugh. The 2 children were so perfect and cute that Yin Yao and Ji Ku were very gratified and loved them dearly. Ji Tianxing was the same. He treated the 2 children as the most precious treasures in his life, and he took good care of them. This was especially true for his daughter, Yi, who loved to pester him. She would be mischievous whenever she had nothing to do, and she would even beg for mercy afterwards. It did not matter how ambitious Ji Tianxing was or how decisive he was when he killed people outside. When he saw his daughter crying, his blood would immediately melt, and he would turn into a doting demon. Everything seemed to be perfect. Regardless of whether it was Ji Tianxing's family, friends, or children, or the situation on Shinwu continent, everything was progressing in a positive direction. However, in the depths of Ji Tianxing's heart, there was a hidden worry that he couldn't get rid of. As Chun Shun and Yaya continued to grow and become so perfect and adorable, Ji Tianxing's worries grew stronger and stronger. He would often recall the ruthless words left behind by the Southern Expedition Marshal before he escaped from the 5 Elements world. He was very clear in his heart that the Southern Expedition Marshal would not let this matter rest. Sooner or later, he would come back again. After all, the Southern Expedition Marshal had seen the miraculous effects of the Origin Stones and understood the uniqueness and power of the 5 Elements world. When the Southern Expedition Marshal recovers from his injuries and reinvigorates the 5 Elements world, it will be the true end of the world. At that time, the Southern Expedition Marshal would definitely bring more experts and a stronger fleet. Not only did he want to invade the 5 Elements world and seize the Origin Stones, but he also wanted to kill all the martial gods. Ji Tianxing didn't want to see that happen, and he would never allow that to happen. No matter what, he had to think of a way to prevent such a tragedy from happening. Not only for the people of the Shinwu continent, but also for his wife, children, and friends. A bold idea grew in his mind, and it grew stronger and stronger. The emissary of the divine ruins is already dead, and no one can open or enter the graveyard of the gods. The 5 Elements world doesn't even have its final trump card. If the Southern Expedition Marshal invades again, we won't be able to resist, and the result will be a tragedy. No, I have to take the initiative to attack and kill the Southern Expedition Marshal and delay the Heaven Punisher's army. Even if I can't destroy the Heaven Punisher's army, I have to delay them so that they can attack the Five Elements world. This idea took root in Ji Tianxing's mind, and it became more and more profound. As time passed, he quietly made his preparations. Half a year later, he had made all the necessary preparations. While Yun Yao and Ji Ku were in seclusion, he left behind a jade slip and quietly left the divine tower. Of course, he took Qian Yu and the Black Dragon with him. Qian Yu and the Black Dragon had long since reached the 9th level of the martial god realm, but they still couldn't see any hope of breaking through to the true god realm. They were tired of cultivating in seclusion and had long since wanted to go out and explore. When they heard Ji Tianxing's plan, they volunteered to follow him. Ji Tianxing brought them out of the divine ruins and rushed to the hidden dragon abyss in the north of Tianxing's divine kingdom. Along the way, Ji Tianxing and Qian Yu stood on the black dragon's back and sped through the sky. Qian Yu was filled with joy and excitement, and he couldn't help but ask Ji Tianxing, "Old Ji, with just a few of us, can we really cross the void and kill the Southern Expedition Marshal?" Ji Tianxing smiled. "Of course. Not only the Southern Expedition Marshal, but we also have to delay the Heaven Punisher's army and create pressure for them so that they can attack the Five Elements world." Wow! Qian Yu was even more surprised, and he exclaimed in disbelief, "Old Ji, isn't this idea too crazy and exciting? Can you tell me what your specific plan is?" Ji Tianxing shook his head and explained, "I don't have a specific plan, only a main idea. The rest is up to us. We have to go through the temple under the lava ocean, leave the Five Elements world, and go to the outer space. Then, we will use the divine ship to travel through space and rush to the Purple Cloud planet. The Heaven Punisher's army has already taken over the Purple Cloud planet, and they want to take control of the entire planet. They are fighting everywhere. In this way, the number of troops stationed on the Purple Cloud planet will not be too many. As long as we find a way to sneak into the Purple Cloud planet, we can think of a way to deal with the Southern Expedition Marshal." Qian Yu nodded and said in agreement, "Old Ji, this is a good idea. Let's do it. After all, the Southern Expedition Marshal is the strongest in the Purple Cloud planet. As long as we kill him and delay the main force of the Heaven Punisher's army, we can save the Five Elements world. The fleets that are sent out to fight are all led by generals like Fu Long, and there are less than 100 warships. Even if they invade the Five Elements world, they can't defeat your two wives." A day later, Black Dragon entered the hidden dragon abyss and went straight to the lava ocean. Ji Tianxing met Bai Long and Lan Kuan in the temple of the human race in the Earth's core cave. White Dragon had just collected a large number of dawn stones and was counting them. When he saw Ji Tianxing, he quickly put down what he was doing and came up to him expectantly. "Master, why are you here all of a sudden? And you have two pets with you? Look at you. Were you going to cause trouble?" Ji Tianxing looked at him with a smile and said in a playful tone, "We are going to cross the void and destroy the evil demon king to save the world. Are you interested?" "Save the world?" White Dragon shook his head in disappointment. "I'm not interested in that. If you want to conquer the universe, collect beauties from various races, and open a harem, then count me in." Chapter 25:47. Bai Long's eyes shone brightly when he mentioned conquering the galaxy and collecting beauties from various races. However, he did not receive a response. He looked up at Ji Tianxing and was met with a pair of big eyes. "Whether you are interested or not, you have to come with me," Ji Tianxing said expressionlessly. Bai Long immediately put on a smile and nodded. "Yes, master. I will do as you say. I will dedicate my youth and passion to the great cause of saving the world." Ji Tianxing did not want to listen to him. He immediately used his trump card. Swoosh! He flipped his right palm. A golden light flashed in his palm, and a palm-sized black boat appeared. At first glance, this mysterious and cold boat that was as black as ink exuded an ancient aura. Upon closer inspection, one would realize that the boat was exquisitely made and shone with a dazzling golden light. Bai Long stared at the black boat and asked in disbelief, "Master, is this a newly made divine worship?" "Wow, As expected of your handiwork, this divine worship is so exquisite and meticulous. It's simply a work of art. Bai Long circled around Ji Tianxing and observed the divine worship excitedly. He rubbed his hands excitedly. Ji Tianxing explained with a smile, "This is not my masterpiece. The Golden Mountain King and the Earth Spirit Tribe's craftsmen spent a few years and 200 million origin stones to make it." "Ah, is that so?" Bai Long was shocked. He exclaimed in disbelief, "Doesn't that mean 80% of the origin stones we mined in the past 10 years were used to make the divine worship?" "Of course." Ji Tianxing nodded and said with a smile, "This origin stone divine worship is enough for us to travel across the universe. If you follow me, you will be the one to pilot the divine worship." Bai Long was so excited that his blood rushed to his head. He danced with joy. Yes, Master is wise. Master is mighty. Master is unparalleled in the world. Disciple will follow Master's orders and do his best to live up to your expectations. Seeing his reaction, Ji Tianxing put away the divine worship and instructed, "Go and make arrangements for the human race and the origin stones in the Earth's core. I will wait for you here." White Dragon complied and hurriedly went to arrange the specific matters. Watching him leave, Qianyu muttered in confusion, "Old Ji, what's wrong with White Dragon? You weren't too happy just now. Why are you so excited in the blink of an eye?" Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "This kid likes to pilot battleships and travel through space. His love for all kinds of high-end warships had reached a fanatical level. I once asked him why he was so crazy about warships. He said that it was his dream since he was young. As long as he could pilot a battleship, he would have reached the peak of his life." Very quickly, an hour passed. White Dragon arranged the follow-up matters and came to Ji Tianxing expectantly. Ji Tianxing did not say much and brought him out of the human race's divine palace. After entering the sea of lava, he took out the Tianxing battleship and handed it to White Dragon. White Dragon received it happily and released his divine power into the divine worship. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, the palm-sized black divine worship grew to the size of a mountain and was more than 2,000 feet long. The White Dragon couldn't wait to get into the divine worship. He looked around and rubbed his hands, looking very excited. After Ji Tianxing, Qianyu, Black Dragon, and Lan Kuan entered the divine worship, he calmed down and steered the divine worship through the sea of lava. Swoosh! The divine worship's array formation had just been activated, and it flew out from its static state. It turned into a black shadow and entered the depths of the sea of lava. Such terrifying speed shocked Qianyu, Black Dragon, and Lan Kuan. Even if they rushed at full speed, they were not even 1/5 of the divine worship's speed. The White Dragon, on the other hand, was so excited that its blood was boiling. It even whistled and hummed a weird song. Under normal circumstances, they would need a day to reach the black hole in the sea of lava. But White Dragon steered the Tianxing battleship and entered the black hole in 6 hours. Swoosh! After passing through the black hole, the battleship flew into the ancient temple. Under White Dragon's control, the battleship shrunk dozens of times before successfully entering the second level of the temple and entering the ancient teleportation array. In the next moment, the Tianxing battleship appeared in the vast void. Swoosh! The pitch-black void was eternally cold and still. In all directions, in the depths of the darkness, there were densely packed silver light spots. Those were thousands of stars, shining brightly in the darkness. Below the Skyline battleship was a huge, barren planet, its surface covered with pale yellow sand. White Dragon sent a voice transmission to Ji Tianxing. "Master, which direction are we going?" Ji Tianxing thought for a moment and said, "Our target is the Purple Cloud Star. The Five Elements world is southeast of the Purple Cloud Star zone, but the Purple Cloud Star is in the center. You will fly northwest. It will probably take a year to reach there." Bai Long hurriedly responded, "All right, Master, you can rest at ease. Leave the rest to me." Then, White Dragon steered the Tianxing battleship, cutting through the void like a stream of light, and headed northwest. Tianxing and the three divine beasts stayed in the battleship, each finding a room to cultivate in peace. In the void, time seemed to be frozen, and one could not feel the passage of time. The surrounding scenery seemed to be unchanged. White Dragon enjoyed the rush of driving the divine battleship, while Tianxing and the three divine beasts were busy cultivating in seclusion, constantly improving their strength. God knows how long had passed. Maybe 3 months, maybe half a year. While Tianxing was cultivating, White Dragon's voice transmission rang in his mind. Master? Master, wake up. I have something important to report. Tianxing quickly woke up and ended his cultivation. White Dragon, why did you wake me up? Have we arrived at the purple cloud star? Tianxing sat in the dark room, resting with his eyes closed, and asked White Dragon through voice transmission. White Dragon hesitated for a moment, then explained, No, we have only been flying for 4 months, and we are still very far from the purple cloud star. Master, this disciple interrupted your cultivation because this disciple discovered that a medium-sized fleet is attacking a planet. Tianxing was stunned by the sudden news. He asked, What fleet? What star are they attacking? Did you see the situation clearly? White Dragon quickly explained, I flew around the star for half a day, and I roughly saw the situation. The fleet has more than 100 battleships, and the attacks they release are all dark red light beams. Also, the battleships look like the style of the Heaven Punishers. I suspect that it is the Heaven Punishers' fleet, and they are invading a mortal world. Then, White Dragon said uneasily, Master, if you don't want to cause trouble, we will not meddle in other people's business. I will go around. Tianxing sneered. Ha ha! If it is really the Heaven Punishers' fleet, then I am not meddling in other people's business. Today I will help the people get rid of evil, and I will help Tianxing. Chapter 25:48. Tianxing's words made by Long's blood boil. Xiaomeng, Xiaomeng. He said without hesitation, Master, you are indeed a benevolent and righteous saint. You are the role model and leader of all martial artists. A lot of flattery came out fluently, and Tianxing got goosebumps when he heard it. Cut the crap. Let's go take a look. Okay. Bai Long replied. He steered the battleship and turned into a black shadow as he charged toward the star on the left. Soon, Tianxing's battleship arrived at the void closest to the star. The star was not big. It was several times smaller than the Five Elements world. The surface of the star was covered by a faint silver divine light shield. One could vaguely see the shadow of a sky wolf. In the void not far from the divine light shield, there were hundreds of black battleships. They were spreading out and releasing dark red light beams to attack. Thousands of dark red pillars of light, as dense as raindrops, fiercely slammed into the divine light barrier, causing a deafening explosion. The violent shockwave, mixed with countless light fragments, burst out in all directions. After Tianxing and Bai Long observed carefully, they confirmed that the fleet belonged to the Heaven-Defying tribe. They did not know how long the Heaven-Defying tribe had been attacking. A large gap had been created in the silver divine light shield. A group of experts was casting spells to block the attack of the dark red light beams at the gap that was dozens of miles long and 10 miles wide. Tianxing looked over and saw that there were more than 30 people in that group of experts. Their bodies and appearances were different from humans. They looked more like demons. Their upper bodies were similar to humans. However, their heads were sharp wolf heads. Their lower bodies were wolf bodies with 4 hooves. They were covered with thick hair. They were thin and slender. Their eyes were dark green, and they shone with a cold light. The leader of the group was huge. He was at least 100 feet long. His hair was silver, and he was an LV6 martial god. He exuded a powerful aura. Tianxing immediately had an answer when he saw everyone's faces clearly. They are from the Sky Wolf tribe. This star should be the Sky Wolf star. Strictly speaking, the Sky Wolf tribe is not a human. They are a branch of the demon clan. Bai Long nodded. He asked through voice transmission, Master, it looks like the Sky Wolf tribe can't hold on for long. When should we save them? Should we wait until the Heaven-Defying tribe enters the Sky Wolf star before we save them? Ji Tianqing looked at the battlefield and observed the situation. He replied through voice transmission, "No need. We are in a hurry. Let's end this quickly." Of course, there was another important reason for his decision. It would be best if they could kill the heaven-defying fleet. If the heaven-destroying fleet was allowed to charge into the Sirius Star, it would definitely cause more casualties and even implicate a large number of innocent civilians. White Dragon charge. Ji Tianqing transmitted his voice to the White Dragon and gave the order. At the same time, he leaped out of the battleship and flew toward a nearby, heaven-slaying battleship with the Heaven Barrier sword in hand. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, Ji Tianqing traversed 500 miles and arrived at the side of the heaven-defying tribe. Without hesitation, his body expanded to a height of 100 feet. He held the huge sword of burial of heaven with both hands and slashed it down. There was a martial God Realm captain in the heaven-defying tribe. He was commanding hundreds of soldiers in black armor to control the formation to attack the Skywolf Star. When the sword of burial of heaven slashed down, the captain realized that something was wrong. His expression changed drastically. "Get out of the way," he roared. He wanted to steer the heaven-defying sword of burial of heaven. However, this was an impossible task. Before the soldiers in black armor could react, the huge sword of burial of heaven slashed the heaven-defying tribe's battleship. Kaboom! With an earth-shattering explosion, the Middle Void God Realm battleship was cut in half by the sword of burial of heaven. Countless black metal fragments splattered in the void. Dozens of soldiers in black armor and the captain in silver armor flew out of the wreckage and fell into the void. The crowd immediately fell into chaos, letting out panicked roars and curses. Even though the captain shouted and ordered everyone not to panic and to form a battle formation to face the enemy, it was useless. Ji Tianqing charged over with his sword again. Like a tiger in a flock of sheep, he stirred up a storm of blood in the crowd. Swoosh! 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 Dazzling golden sword light bloomed. It was mixed with various thunderbolts and exploded in the crowd. Bam! 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 One by one, the soldiers in black armor were cut into pieces by the sword light. Their broken bodies scattered in the void and were sent flying into the distance by the shockwave. In just 100 breaths, 80% of the hundreds of soldiers in black armor were killed by Ji Tianqing. The remaining 20 black-armored warriors had long since fled in all directions, fleeing for their lives in panic. Ji Tianqing did not bother to chase after them. He charged toward the captain in silver armor with his sword in hand. The captain only had the strength of an LV-3 martial god. He could not defend himself against Ji Tianqing's ferocious attacks. They had only exchanged 3 blows when Ji Tianqing's sword pierced through the captain's chest. The scales on the captain's chest were crushed, and he died on the spot. After dealing with the battleship, Ji Tianqing charged toward another battleship with his sword in hand. At the same time, Bai Long drove the Tianqing battleship into the fleet. The 30,000-foot-long Tianqing battleship was like an ancient beast from the primordial age. It crashed into the heaven-defying tribe's battleships with destructive power. Kaboom! When the first loud explosion occurred, the Tianqing battleship crashed into the side of a heaven-defying tribe's battleship and broke it in half. Debris fell from the sky. More than 100 soldiers in black armor and a captain in silver armor fell from the sky. Before they could recover from the shock, a huge ice-blue fish as large as a mountain charged toward them fearlessly. Bang! 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 More than 20 soldiers in black armor were sent flying by the blue kraken. Their bodies shattered and they died on the spot. The blue kraken opened its mouth and shot out endless ice-blue light beams into the crowd. Boom! 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 Instantly, more than 30 soldiers in black armor were blasted into pieces. The captain in silver armor was severely injured and bleeding profusely. Then, the blue kraken chased after the survivors and killed them one by one. Kaboom! When the second loud explosion occurred, the Tianqing battleship moved at its fastest speed and crashed into a heaven-defying tribe's battleship. The heaven-defying tribe's battleship was completely crushed by the Tianqing battleship. It was instantly turned into a pile of scrap metal, and thousands of pieces of debris flew out. The Tianqing battleship was not damaged at all. It only shook a few times and returned to normal. Bai Long, who was piloting the battleship, laughed excitedly. His blood was boiling. Haha! In front of my super battleship, the heaven-defying tribe's tattered little boats are like paper. They cannot withstand a single blow. He rubbed his hands excitedly and piloted the Tianqing battleship toward another heaven-defying tribe's battleship. At this moment, the heaven-defying tribe realized that something was wrong. A few battleships turned around and aimed their cannons at the Tianqing battleship. Seeing this, Bai Long was not worried. Instead, he laughed confidently and said, I want to be targeted. I want to be pressured. Come at me together. Chapter 2549. White Dragon's arrogant wish was soon realized. The 6 heaven-defying battleships locked onto the Tianqing battleship and shot out hundreds of dark red light pillars. Bang! 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 Dark red pillars of light that were as dense as raindrops landed on the Skyline battleship one after another, producing deafening booms. Suddenly, the Tianqing battleship was engulfed by the endless red light. However, the battleship only shook a few times and did not have any wounds or dents on its surface. On the other hand, the hundreds of dark red light pillars collapsed one after another, splashing out shards that blotted out the sky. This result shocked the heaven-defying battleships. The heaven-defying elites looked at each other and did not know what to do. White Dragon was getting more and more excited. He laughed in high spirits. Haha, too weak. You bunch of trash. Are you trying to scratch my itch? As he spoke, he drove the Tianqing battleship at maximum speed. He turned into a black shadow and charged toward the few battleships in front of him. Boom, boom, boom. 3 loud bangs were heard. The 3 heaven-defying battleships that were lined up side by side were immediately pierced by the candied hawthorn. They were broken into pieces by the Tianqing battleship. Hundreds of black-armored warriors and the 3 silver-armored captains were blown away by the violent impact, falling into the void in a mess. The Tianqing battleship smashed 3 heaven-defying battleships in a row before the impact was offset and its speed slowed down. White Dragon turned back and accelerated toward the chaotic crowd in an invincible and violent manner. Bang! 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 More than 100 black-armored soldiers could not dodge in time and were smashed into pieces by the Tianqing battleship. They died instantly. Even the heaven-defying battleships who were brushed by the battleship were sent flying and vomiting blood. White Dragon laughed proudly and drove the Tianqing battleship into the heaven-defying battleship. He was extremely arrogant and domineering. At the front, White Dragon drove the battleship into the heaven-defying battleship. At the back, Ji Tianqing, Lan Kun, Qian Yu, and Black Dragon massacred the heaven-defying battleships in the void and killed many silver-armored captains. Soon, the heaven-conquering fleet fell into chaos, and it was difficult for them to take care of the front and rear. At the forefront of the fleet, there was a black battleship that was 2,000 feet long. Its body was exceptionally ferocious and domineering. This was the flagship of the fleet's leader, General Gutty. Originally, General Gutty's flagship was responsible for attacking the Sirius Star. The gap in the silver barrier was torn open by this ship. General Gutty was confident of victory. She thought that she could charge into the Sirius Star within 2 hours. He never would have thought that someone would come and cause trouble at such a crucial moment, causing the entire fleet to be in disarray. He flew into a rage and immediately ordered them to stop attacking the Sirius Star and turn around to deal with the mysterious battleship that had suddenly intruded. Fire! Destroy it for me! General Gutty angrily gave the order, her body bursting with killing intent. The flagship immediately unleashed 200 crimson light beams, which blasted towards the Tianqing battleship thousands of miles away. Even though the Tianqing battleship was huge, like a moving mountain. However, its speed was extremely fast, like a phantom, and it appeared to be exceptionally nimble. Boom, 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 boom. The 200 light beams tore through the void, but more than half of them were dodged by the Tianqing battleship. The remaining 60 light beams struck the Tianqing battleship, but they did not cause much damage. The Tianqing battleship was completely unharmed. There was not even a dent on its surface, and its defensive divine array was not broken. Seeing this, General Gudi's eyes widened in anger and disbelief. How is this possible? Where did that battleship come from? How can it block the attack of my flagship? Pass down my order. All battleships stop attacking the Sirius Star and surround that mysterious battleship first. We must destroy it. As his order was passed down, hundreds of battleships adjusted their direction and formed a circle with a radius of 20,000 miles, surrounding the Tianqing battleship. Endless dark red light beams poured down on the Tianqing battleship like a torrential rain. Inside the battleship, Bai Long put away his smug and joking expression. His expression became as calm as water, and a cold smile appeared on his lips. Ha ha! You want to use the encirclement tactic to destroy me first before attacking the Sirius Star? Then I'll play with you, a bunch of iron dolls. As he sneered, he formed a divine seal with both hands and continuously shot out dense golden light to control the battleship's divine array. Whoosh! The Tianqing battleship's speed reached the maximum. It turned into a black phantom and sped through the void. The phantom was erratic and flashed, sometimes moving forward, sometimes retreating, and the next moment, it turned around and swung its tail. As a result, it dodged most of the dark red light beams shot out by the hundreds of battleships. Even if a small portion of the light beams hit it, they could not break its defensive divine array, let alone stop it from moving. However, the heaven-conquering battleships immediately suffered. Bam, 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 bam. As a series of loud noises exploded, one battleship after another was hit by the Tianqing battleship. Some battleships were smashed into pieces and twisted out of shape. Some of the battleships were smashed into two halves. Some battleships were hit by the Tianqing battleship from the abdomen and directly split open. All in all, the Tianqing battleship was like an extremely agile fish that swam freely in the sea. Nothing could stop it. However, this fish was extremely sturdy and had infinite strength. If this fish was made of steel, then the dozens of heaven-conquering battleships were made of paper. This encirclement battle lasted for a few minutes before it was over. The Tianqing battleship was unscathed, but the heaven-conquering battleship was confused and suffered heavy losses. A total of more than 50 battleships were destroyed. Thousands of black-armored soldiers and dozens of silver-armored captains were not spared. They were quickly killed by Tianqing and the three divine beasts. This result caused General Gudi to break down on the spot. He could not believe that there was such a heaven-defying battleship in the Purple Cloud Galaxy. In his grief and anger, he could only suppress the humiliation and rage in his heart and give the order to retreat. The 40 battleships that were lucky enough to survive turned around and flew into the depths of the void, fleeing in panic. However, General Gudi soon discovered that it was wishful thinking for the fleet to successfully retreat. The more than 30 powerhouses guarding the Sirius Star were in high spirits. They took the initiative to rush into the void and chase after the heaven-conquering battleship. The Tianqing battleship, Tianqing, and the three divine beasts did not give up. They destroyed one heaven-conquering battleship after another along the way. The two sides chased each other in the void for 100,000 miles. More than 30 of the 40 battleships that were lucky enough to survive were destroyed. The black-armored soldiers and captains were also killed by Tianqing and the powerhouses of the Sirius Star tribe. General Gudi knew that the situation was hopeless. In his fury, he gave up on escaping. He personally steered his battleship and turned around to charge toward the Tianqing battleship. Even if he died, he would drag the other party down with him. Boom! Crack! The two giants did not avoid each other. They collided head-on with a loud explosion that shook the void. Chapter 2550. A destructive shockwave spread through the void. General Gudi's flagship was smashed into pieces, sending thousands of pieces flying everywhere. The wreckage of countless battleships flew into the void with a terrifying force. A huge storm was born, sweeping through tens of thousands of miles. The 200 black-armored warriors in the warship were instantly smashed to pieces and died. General Guti and the 3 captains were also severely injured. They were wrapped in the wreckage of the warship and scattered in the void. Before the 3 captains could react, Lan Kuan, Qianyu, and Black Dragon pounced forward and killed them. General Guti endured his injuries and flew out of the wreckage, trying to escape into the depths of the void. However, Ji Tianxing caught up to him and held him back. Soon, a few serious elites rushed over and joined forces to attack General Guti. After more than 10 moves, General Guti died under Ji Tianxing's sword. Not only was his body destroyed, but even his divine soul was shattered. The battle ended, and everyone in the heaven-conquering fleet was killed. Ji Tianxing put away the sword of burial of heaven and was about to turn and leave. At this moment, the huge silver-white Sirius elite led many Sirius elites and flew in front of Ji Tianxing. "Brave warrior, please wait." The leader of the Sirius elites looked at Ji Tianxing with a gentle gaze. He crossed his arms and covered his shoulders as he bowed to Ji Tianxing. The 20 or so Sirius experts behind him also bowed and paid their respects to Ji Tianxing. Even though everyone's injuries were very miserable, their bodies were covered in blood, and many of their bodies were crippled. However, everyone's expression and eyes were filled with the joy of surviving a calamity, as well as deep gratitude. However, they spoke in the Sirius language. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment before he understood what they meant. He turned to look at the leader of the Sirius elites and asked unhurriedly in the somewhat unfamiliar Sirius language, "Is there anything else?" Seeing that he could speak the language of the Sirius clan, many of the Sirius clan's experts were pleasantly surprised, and their attitude towards him became even more intimate. The leader of the Celestial Wolf tribe nodded at Ji Tianxing and said with a smile, "Warrior, I am the Celestial Lord of the Celestial Wolf Star. My people call me the Celestial Wolf God. What I am ashamed of is that as the guardian of the Sirius Star, I was unable to stop the invasion of the Heaven Punishers and caused countless casualties among my people. Fortunately, you helped and destroyed the Heaven-attacking fleet and General Guti. Otherwise, the Sirius Star would have fallen today. I and the 28 Constellation Guards will also perish under the bombardment of the heaven-destroying fleet. You have saved me and the Sirius Star. Such kindness is higher than the sky and deeper than the sea. I sincerely invite you to the Sirius Star as a guest to express our gratitude." After hearing this, Ji Tianxing learned that the strongest and most imposing expert was known as the Heavenly Wolf God. The Celestial Wolf tribe experts behind him, who were at the first and second level of the Martial God realm, were known as the 28 Constellation Guards. Ji Tianxing roughly understood that the 28 Constellation Guards were most likely there to assist the Heavenly Wolf God and protect the Sirius Star. He shook his head and said calmly, "Heavenly Wolf God, you don't have to be so polite. I was just passing by and saw that the Heaven-attacking star was attacking the Sirius Star. In fact, I also have a blood feud with the Heaven-attacking star. Even if the Heaven-attacking star did not attack the Sirius Star, as long as I encountered them, they would definitely die. There's no need to thank me. I still have matters to attend to." When they heard Ji Tianxing's words, the Heavenly Wolf God and the Constellation Guards felt even more cordial toward him. They felt as if they shared a common enemy. Therefore, the Heavenly Wolf God was even more unwilling to let Ji Tianxing leave. "Warrior, since you're also at odds with the Heaven-attacking star, we are in the same boat. We should form an alliance and help each other. Now, the Heaven-attacking star has invaded the Purple Cloud Star and is vainly trying to control the entire star field. They are wantonly attacking the various major worlds. Warrior, we sincerely beg you to stay for a few days and rest on the Sirius Star." Then, the Heavenly Wolf God and the 28 Constellation Guards crossed their arms and covered their shoulders. They bowed to Ji Tianxing and refused to get up. Ji Tianxing knew that this was one of the highest forms of courtesy the Heavenly Wolf tribe had. Since the other party was so sincere, he couldn't refuse. Moreover, the Heavenly Wolf God's words reminded him of something. Therefore, after some consideration, he nodded and agreed. "All right, since you are so sincere in your invitation, I cannot refuse your kind intentions." The heavenly wolf god and the constellation guards were overjoyed and quickly got up. "Warrior, please gather your companions. Let's enter the Sirius star together." The heavenly wolf god pointed at the Tianqing battleship and the three divine beasts that were still cleaning up the battlefield in the distance. Tianqing nodded and used his divine soul to summon the white dragon and the three divine beasts. The three divine beasts hurriedly returned to the battleship. The white dragon steered the Tianqing battleship toward Tianqing. Seizing this opportunity, the heavenly wolf god asked Tianqing, "Warrior, may I know your title?" Tianqing calmly replied, "Tianqing." The heavenly wolf god bowed again and said respectfully, "Greetings, true god Tianqing." The 28 constellation guards also bowed and greeted him in unison. Clearly, no one could tell Tianqing's cultivation level. After witnessing his powerful techniques, they all believed that he was a true god expert. After all, only a true god expert could split the heaven-punishing battleship in half with a sword, kill the captain of the heaven-punishing battleship in an instant, and easily kill General Guti. Tianqing only nodded and did not explain anything. In any case, although he was a peak martial god, his true combat strength was comparable to a third-level true god expert. There is nothing wrong with the heavenly wolf god and the others calling him a true god. Before long, the Tianqing battleship flew in front of everyone. Tianqing turned and stepped into the battleship. The heavenly wolf god and the 28 constellation guards led the way and flew toward the Sirius star. Swoosh! Everyone flew in front of the silver light barrier and passed through the huge gap, entering the Sirius star. The white dragon steered the Tianqing battleship and stopped in front of the gap. He was a little hesitant and asked Tianqing via voice transmission, "Master, didn't you say that we were in a hurry? Why are we going to the Sirius star as a guest?" Tianqing said with a playful smile, "The heavenly wolf god sincerely invited me. It's hard to refuse." The white dragon pursed his lips and chuckled. "Master, I know you too well. I'm afraid that's not the reason, right?" Tianqing raised his eyebrows and asked, "Oh, then tell me, what's the real reason?" The white dragon answered without hesitation, "In my opinion, you saved the Sirius star. The heavenly wolf god is grateful to you and will definitely think of a way to repay you. You don't care about resources and treasures, but you're worried about the Five Elements world. Coincidentally, the Sirius star is not far from the Five Elements world. If the Five Elements world is in danger, the Sirius star can help." He. You're really smart." Tianqing's tone was indifferent as he said, "You know too much." Chapter 25:51. After the battleship entered the Sirius star, it followed the Sirius god and the others through the sky. Follow_dream. A few hours later, the Sirius god and the others flew into a sea of clouds. This vast sea of clouds spanned 1,000,000 miles. It was as solid and flat as a continent. Neither the wind nor the scorching sun could move the sea of clouds. In the depths of the sea of clouds, there was a dazzling palace complex. It was especially sacred and majestic. Tianqing's battleship followed the Sirius god and the others and landed outside the sacred palace. Then, the three divine beasts stayed in the battleship to rest. Tianqing put away the battleship and stepped into the temple with the white dragon. This was the most sacred place of the Sirius star. It was called the Sirius Temple. The Sirius god and the 28 lunar mansion guards lived here all year round to protect the entire star. After entering the temple, the Sirius god dismissed the 28 lunar mansion guards and told them to retreat to recuperate. He endured his heavy injuries and received Tianqing and the white dragon. Both parties took their seats in the majestic hall. Immediately, for beautiful and wild Sirius maids came to serve Tianqing and the white dragon. Tianqing was not interested in this. He waved his hand to signal the two maids to retreat and serve the white dragon. The four beautiful maids surrounded the white dragon. The white dragon's blood was boiling and his heart was itching. However, he pretended to be serious and kept a straight face sitting upright and still. He waved his hand expressionlessly and dismissed the four maids. Ji Tianxing was amused when he saw this. He could not help but ask, "Isn't this what you want? How can you not be moved?" The white dragon replied seriously, "Master, how can you think like that? Am I that kind of person? I am learning your noble character. I will not be moved by beauty." Ji Tianxing could not be bothered to listen to his nonsense. He started chatting with the serious god. "Serious god, when did the Heaven Destroyers start invading the Sirius star? I saw that the Heaven Destroyers had just torn open the Sirius star's defensive barrier. They had not entered the Sirius star yet." The serious god shook his head angrily and explained, "True, God Tianxing, you might not know this, but the Heaven Destroyers are very cunning. As early as 3 years ago, a small fleet of heaven-destroying fleets had used secret techniques and special divine artifacts to break through the defensive shield of the Sirius star. There were more than 30 battleships in that fleet. They secretly invaded a continent and took control of the 4 divine kingdoms. A year ago, under the control of the Heaven Punisher race, the 4 divine kingdoms of that continent madly attacked another continent and slaughtered billions of martial practitioners and citizens. The serious god did not hide the truth and told Ji the serious god. He explained the entire story. After listening to his explanation, Ji Tianxing finally understood the whole story. It turned out that the Sirius star was different from the 5 elements world. It had 4 continents, more than a dozen divine kingdoms, and more than 30 billion living beings. After the Heaven Punishers secretly took control of one continent, they crazily attacked another. Not long after, the serious god realized something was wrong and led the 28 Lunar Mansion guards to counterattack. They could not kill the Sirius race controlled by the Heaven Destroyers. After all, they were innocent. The serious god and the 28 Lunar Mansion guards could only search for the Heaven Destroyers and kill them one by one, destroying one Heaven Destroyer after another. But because of this, the serious god's hands were tied, and he could not act decisively. The war lasted for half a year, causing the 2 continents to be destroyed. More than 10 billion warriors and civilians died. The serious god blamed himself for this. He called himself the sinner of the Sirius star and the disgrace of the Sirius gods. Even now, he could not let it go. After the war ended, he thought the Sirius star was finally at peace. But soon, he realized he was wrong. The greedy and overbearing Heaven Destroyers would not let the Sirius star go. Half a year ago, General Guti led a medium-sized Heaven Destroyer fleet to attack the Sirius star. This time, there were more battleships and Heaven Destroyers. The Sirius star was caught off guard and could not resist. The Sirius god used all his means and gathered all the warriors of the Sirius star to resist the Heaven Destroyer fleet. In half a year, dozens of martial gods of the Sirius star had died. Of the original 49 constellation guards, only 28 were left. As for the martial sage realm warriors of the Sirius race, hundreds of them had died. The Sirius star was at the end of its rope and had been forced into a corner. The battle in the starry sky had been the final battle. If Ji Tianxing had not appeared, the Sirius star would have been defeated. The Sirius god and the 28 Lunar Mansion guards would have died. As for the 30 billion people on the Sirius star, their fates were self-evident. That was why the Sirius god was so grateful to Ji Tianxing and saw him as the savior of the Sirius star. Ji Tianxing said angrily, "Sirius god, I can understand how you feel. A few years ago, the 5 elements realm that I was in also suffered a similar calamity. An entire continent, 3 kingdoms, and tens of billions of people were massacred by the Heaven Destroyer fleet. Corpse puppets were everywhere, and blood flowed like a sea. However, no matter how powerful the Heaven Destroyer fleet is, we will not surrender. We did our best and paid a huge price and sacrificed a lot to destroy the Heaven Destroyer fleet and usher in a short period of peace." The Sirius god resonated strongly with him. However, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. He blamed himself and said, "True God Tianxing, the billions of people in the 5 elements realm are lucky to be under your protection. Unlike me, who was weak and could not even protect the people of the Sirius Star and let them suffer so much. Ji Tianxing shook his head and said, "Serious God, you don't have to blame yourself. You must pull yourself together. As long as the Heaven Destroyer fleet is not destroyed, the war will not truly end. Even if we win today, an even more powerful Heaven Destroyer fleet will invade the Sirius Star soon." The Sirius God nodded and said, "True God Tianxing, I understand what you are saying. I have also prepared myself mentally. Now that the Sirius Star is at the end of its rope, when that day comes, I will lead the 28 constellation guards and perish together with the Heaven Destroyer fleet." Ji Tianxing smiled and said, "You don't have to be so pessimistic. Things will take a turn for the better. However, the prerequisite is that we are not afraid of sacrificing ourselves and have the courage to fight to the death with the Heaven Destroyer fleet. There is something I have to tell you. The person who took over the Purple Cloud Star and tried to control the entire star field was the Heaven Destroyer fleet's Fleet Marshal Nan. 5 years ago, Fleet Marshal Nan personally led a fleet to invade the Five Elements realm, but we stopped him. The entire fleet was destroyed, and only Fleet Marshal Nan was left. He was severely injured and fled back to the Purple Cloud Star. This time, I have come to the Purple Cloud Star to kill Fleet Marshal Nan with my own hands. As long as I kill him, the main culprit, the crisis in the Purple Cloud Star field, will be resolved, and we will have a long period of peace." The Heavenly Wolf God was shocked to the extreme when he heard the news. He stood up with a bang. His eyes widened as he roared in disbelief. "True God Tianxing, is what you said true?